March 21st, 1979. A 17-year-old girl walks up the stairs to her bedroom in Burlington, Vermont. Her family watches television downstairs. By morning, she's gone. No note, no explanation. Just an empty room and a mystery that would haunt a family for over 4 decades. But here's what makes this case different. Here's what keeps investigators wondering. Here's what suggests Celinda Jean Winigar might still be walking among us today. The phone calls started weeks before she disappeared. Anonymous voices threatening her family. Menacing words that forced them to change their number, to hide from whoever was watching. And then came the final call, the one that would either reveal the truth or create the biggest red herring in Vermont's criminal history. This is the story of Celinda Jean Winigar, known to her friends as Cindy, a case that defies every conventional theory about missing persons. A disappearance that might not be a disappearance at all. Burlington, Vermont. 1979. The Winigar family lived at 101 Forest Street in a working-class neighborhood of the city's New North End. John and Mildred Winigar had raised 6 children in this modest home, but Celinda was different. She was the baby of the family, 13 years younger than her next closest sibling. Born April 24th, 1962, she was what you might call an unexpected blessing. Celinda attended Burlington High School. She was 5 feet 4 inches tall, weighed around 115 pounds, with strawberry blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. She had a cross-shaped scar on her left ankle and a slight gap between her front teeth that gave her smile a distinctive charm. Her ears were pierced, and she loved wearing rings on every finger. By early 1979, the Winigar household was experiencing something that would change everything. The phone would ring at odd hours. Strange voices would ask for Celinda specifically. The calls became more frequent, more threatening. The family felt watched, hunted even. Mildred Winigar made the decision to get an unlisted phone number. For a brief moment, the calls stopped. The family breathed easier. They thought whatever storm was brewing had passed. They were wrong. March 21st, 1979 started like any other day. Celinda was home, relaxing with her family. She wore her favorite outfit that day, blue jeans, a green and white striped shirt, and low-top sneakers. Her fingers sparkled with the rings she always wore. According to her family, Celinda mentioned visiting a friend. It wasn't unusual. 17-year-old girls visit friends. They hang out, they talk, they come home for dinner. Except Celinda never came home. When the evening stretched into night with no sign of their youngest daughter, John and Mildred knew something was terribly wrong. They contacted the Burlington Police Department. The search began immediately, but what investigators found raised more questions than answers. All of Celinda's belongings remained in her room. Her clothes, her personal items, everything she would need if she was planning to run away. This wasn't a planned departure. This was something else entirely. What investigators discovered about Celinda's recent behavior painted a complex picture. According to multiple sources, she had fallen in with what family members described as a rough crowd. There were reports of marijuana use, though details about her associates remained frustratingly vague. This is where the case takes its first mysterious turn. In most missing person cases involving teenagers and drugs, there are names, faces, specific individuals who can be questioned. But in Celinda's case, the identity of these supposed bad influences remains unknown even today. Who were these people? Why has no one from this alleged rough crowd ever come forward with information? Why do we have no concrete details about Celinda's activities in the weeks leading up to her disappearance? The threatening phone calls add another layer of complexity. These weren't random harassment calls. They specifically targeted Celinda and her family. Someone knew where they lived, knew their phone number, knew enough about their lives to make credible threats. But threats about what? What had Celinda seen, heard, or become involved in that would prompt such intimidation? The family never revealed the specific content of these calls, leaving investigators and amateur sleuths to speculate about the true nature of the threats. Then came the call that would define this case for decades. A few days after Celinda's disappearance, the Winagar family phone rang. Mildred answered, probably hoping to hear her daughter's voice. Instead, she heard something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. An anonymous male caller delivered a chilling message. The caller claimed Celinda had been murdered and her body was in the Winooski River. The line went dead. This single phone call transformed the case from a missing person investigation into a potential homicide. But here's where the story becomes even stranger. Despite this apparent confession or insider knowledge, police never conducted a comprehensive search of the Winooski River. Think about that for a moment. Someone calls claiming to know exactly where a missing teenager's body can be found, and authorities don't follow up with an extensive search operation. This decision would come to define one of the most controversial aspects of the entire case. Years passed. The case grew cold. But the Winagar family never stopped looking for answers. In 1985, 6 years after Celinda's disappearance, one of her sister's friends made a disturbing discovery while fishing in the Winooski River. She found a clump of blonde hair caught in the rocks along the riverbank. Could this have been evidence related to Celinda's case? The hair was never properly tested or analyzed. In 1985, DNA testing was not available to local police departments. What might have been crucial evidence became just another unanswered question in an already mysterious case. But here's where Celinda's case takes a turn that separates it from typical missing person investigations. Here's where the possibility that she might still be alive becomes more than just wishful thinking. The sightings began almost immediately after her disappearance and continued for years. Not just one or two reported encounters, but multiple credible sightings by people who knew Celinda personally. The most significant sighting occurred in 1981, 2 years after her disappearance. John Winagar, Celinda's father, had passed away. During his funeral service, a family member reported seeing a young woman standing in the back of the church who looked exactly like Celinda. This wasn't a stranger claiming to have seen someone who resembled the missing girl. This was a family member, someone who had known Celinda her entire life, someone who would recognize her face, her posture, her mannerisms. The figure disappeared before anyone could approach her or confirm the identification. But the sighting was credible enough that it reignited hope within the family and prompted renewed interest from investigators. If you're finding this case as compelling as the evidence suggests, hit that subscribe button. These cold cases deserve attention, and every subscription helps us dig deeper into the mysteries that law enforcement couldn't solve. What makes this sighting particularly intriguing is the timing and location. Why would Celinda risk exposure by attending her father's funeral? If she was hiding from dangerous people, if she had fled to protect herself or her family, why would she surface at such a public emotional event? The answer might lie in the psychological profile of someone who didn't run away, but rather someone who was forced to disappear. Someone who desperately wanted to maintain connection with her family but couldn't risk full contact. This theory gains weight when we examine the pattern of reported sightings over the years. Unlike typical false sightings that occur randomly across great distances, Celinda's reported appearances clustered around Burlington and surrounding areas. She was allegedly seen by people who knew her, in places she would logically visit if she was still alive and in the area. Sharon McGarry, Celinda's sister, has spent decades searching for answers. In interviews, she's described the devastating impact of not knowing what happened to her baby sister. But she's also expressed something that many families of missing persons rarely admit: hope. McGarry has stated that she believes there's a possibility Celinda is still alive. This isn't denial or wishful thinking from a grieving family member. This is an assessment based on 45 years of investigating her sister's disappearance, 45 years of following leads and analyzing evidence. The family's conviction that Celinda might be alive is supported by several compelling factors that distinguish this case from typical homicides disguised as missing person cases. First, despite the anonymous caller's claim about the Winooski River, no physical evidence of violence was ever discovered. No blood, no weapon, no signs of struggle at the family home or anywhere else. Second, the threatening phone calls stopped after Celinda's disappearance. If someone had murdered her, why would the harassment end? Typically, perpetrators who make threatening calls continue the psychological torture of families even after committing their crimes. Third, Celinda's age and circumstances made her a perfect candidate for voluntary disappearance. At 17, she was old enough to survive on her own, but young enough to reinvent herself completely. She had allegedly fallen in with people involved in drug activity, which could have provided both motivation and means for disappearing. But perhaps the most compelling evidence that Celinda might still be alive lies in what didn't happen after her disappearance. No body was ever found, despite multiple searches over several decades. The Winooski River, while deep in places, isn't vast enough to permanently conceal human remains. Bodies surface, evidence emerges, particularly in a case that receives significant local media attention and ongoing police interest. No personal effects were ever discovered. Celinda's distinctive jewelry, her clothing from that day, nothing was ever found abandoned or discarded anywhere in the Burlington area. No reliable witness ever came forward claiming to have seen violence committed against her. In a city the size of Burlington, violent crimes rarely occur without someone noticing unusual activity, hearing screams, or observing suspicious behavior. The case also reveals interesting insights about police procedures in the late 1970s. Missing teenager cases were often treated as runaways until proven otherwise. This approach, while problematic by today's standards, might have actually benefited Celinda if she was indeed hiding voluntarily. If she had fled to escape dangerous associates, if she needed time to disappear safely, the initial assumption that she was a runaway might have provided crucial cover. It might have prevented intensive searches that could have exposed her location to the very people she was trying to avoid. Modern cold case investigators have applied new techniques to the Celinda Winigar case. Age progression photos show what she might look like today at 63 years old. DNA samples are available for comparison if remains are ever discovered. Digital databases now allow for cross-referencing with Jane Doe cases across multiple states, but these modern tools have also revealed something interesting. Despite decades of advanced forensic capabilities, despite nationwide databases, and improved communication between law enforcement agencies, no evidence has emerged to suggest Celinda Winigar is deceased. This absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, but it does support the theory that she might have successfully disappeared and created a new life elsewhere. Consider the practical aspects of disappearing in 1979. No Social Security database monitoring, no widespread use of credit reports, no digital footprints, no security cameras, no cell phone tracking. A motivated 17-year-old with the right connections could feasibly vanish and assume a new identity. The drug connections that allegedly influenced Celinda before her disappearance might have provided exactly those resources. People involved in illegal activities often have access to false identification, alternative living situations, and networks that operate outside official channels. If Celinda feared for her safety, if she had witnessed something or become involved in something that put her at risk, disappearing might have been her only option for survival. The threatening phone calls support this theory. They suggest Celinda was already in danger before she disappeared. The calls targeted her specifically, indicating she had somehow attracted the attention of people willing to intimidate an entire family. What could a 17-year-old girl have done to warrant such threats? The most likely scenarios involve her being a witness to criminal activity or accidentally becoming involved in something dangerous through her association with the wrong people. If this is accurate, then her disappearance might have been carefully planned. She might have realized the danger she was in and arranged her own exit strategy. The visit to a friend might have been the first step in a predetermined escape plan. This theory also explains why she left all her belongings behind. Taking personal items would have slowed her down and potentially provided clues about her intentions. Someone planning to disappear permanently would travel light and leave no hints about their destination. The timing of her disappearance just after the family changed their phone number might be significant. If the threatening calls had temporarily stopped, she might have seized that window of opportunity to escape while her tormentors were regrouping or trying to re-establish contact. Recent developments in the case include renewed interest from amateur investigators and true crime enthusiasts. Online forums dedicated to cold cases have generated new theories and potential leads. Social media has allowed for wider distribution of Celinda's photos and case details. But perhaps most significantly, advances in genetic genealogy have opened new possibilities for resolution. If Celinda is alive and has living descendants, DNA matches through genealogy websites could potentially identify her current location or confirm her identity under an assumed name. The Vermont State Police continue to list Celinda Jean Winigar as a missing person. They encourage anyone with information to contact them, no matter how much time has passed. Cold case detectives emphasize that people's circumstances change, that someone who couldn't speak up in 1979 might be willing to come forward today. For the Winigar family, the passage of time has brought both pain and perspective. Celinda's parents passed away without ever learning what happened to their youngest daughter. But her siblings continue to search, continue to hope, continue to believe that somewhere, somehow, Cindy Winigar might still be alive. The case remains active in databases maintained by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the Vermont State Police, and multiple cold case organizations. Age progression photos are regularly updated and distributed. What makes Celinda's case unique among long-term missing person investigations is the absence of closure indicators that typically emerge over time. No deathbed confessions from potential perpetrators, no discovery of remains during construction projects or environmental changes, no credible admissions of guilt from anyone connected to the case. This absence of traditional resolution markers, combined with the credible sightings over the years, supports the possibility that Celinda Jean Winigar successfully disappeared and has been living under a different identity for the past 4 decades. If you've been following this case and find yourself wondering what happened to this young woman, if you believe these cold cases deserve continued attention and investigation, make sure to like this video and share it with others who care about justice for missing persons. Every view, every share, every comment keeps these stories alive and increases the chances that someone with information will finally come forward. Today, Celinda Jean Winigar would be 63 years old. She might be a grandmother. She might have built a successful career under an assumed name. She might be living quietly in a small town somewhere, always looking over her shoulder, always wondering if it's safe to make contact with the family she left behind. Or she might have died decades ago, her remains never discovered, her fate never revealed. But until evidence emerges to definitively answer the question of what happened on March 21, 1979, the possibility remains that somewhere in America, a woman named Celinda Jean Winigar is still alive, still keeping the secret of why she had to disappear, still wondering if it's finally safe to come home. The truth about Celinda Winigar's disappearance lies somewhere in the gap between what we know and what we can prove. 45 years later, that gap continues to offer hope to a family that has never stopped believing their sister, their daughter, might still be out there, waiting for the right moment to resurface. Until that day comes, Celinda Jean Winigar remains one of Vermont's most enduring mysteries, a case that challenges our assumptions about missing persons and reminds us that sometimes the most extraordinary explanation might just be the truth. February 12, 2025. A man searching for scrap metal along Buffalo Bayou in Houston makes a discovery that will haunt him forever. Inside a yellow igloo cooler, abandoned near the murky waters, he finds human skeletal remains. What he doesn't know yet is that this gruesome discovery will finally answer questions that have tormented a family for almost a year. The remains belong to 35-year-old Dionne Williams, a mother of 2 young daughters, who vanished from Houston's 5th Ward in April 2024. But this isn't just another missing person case. This is a story about how a family's worst fears became reality, how months of desperate searching ended in the most heartbreaking way possible, and how a simple cooler would expose the dark truth about what happened to Dion. What makes this case particularly disturbing is the timeline. Dion's body was found 5 months before anyone even knew it was her. For 5 agonizing months, while her family distributed flyers and held on to hope, Dion's remains sat in the Harris County morgue waiting for identification. The question that haunts everyone involved is simple, yet terrifying. Who put Dion in that cooler, and why did it take so long to connect her disappearance to those remains? Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. April 2024, Houston's Fifth Ward. Dion Williams, described by her family as a caring and talented woman who braided hair for a living, was living what many would call a transient lifestyle. She moved from place to place, struggled with addiction, but maintained one constant in her chaotic life. She always, without fail, stayed in contact with her family. Dion's aunt, Janella Davis, would later tell reporters something that perfectly captured who Dion was beneath her struggles. Despite everything, she is still a mom. She does hair, and the last time I saw her, she braided my hair after she got out of jail. But then she disappeared. The Williams family was tight-knit. They had Sunday dinners together. They made a big deal about Mother's Day. Dion never missed these gatherings, no matter what was happening in her life. So when April turned into May and Mother's Day came and went without a word from Dion, her mother, Melissa Cashaw, knew something was terribly wrong. "We got very concerned when we did not see her for Mother's Day," Cashaw told reporters. "She would never miss Mother's Day." But here's where the story takes its first dark turn. The last conversation anyone had with Dion revealed something that would later prove crucial to understanding what happened to her. She had told family members that she met a rapper, someone who lived in the Fifth Ward area, not far from Cavalcade and Hoffman. That was the last time anyone spoke to her. Think about that for a moment. A vulnerable woman, struggling with addiction, tells her family she's met someone new in an area known for its challenges. Then she vanishes completely. The family's immediate instinct was right. Something had gone horribly wrong. For months, the Williams family did everything they could think of. They printed flyers with Dion's photo. They distributed them throughout the Fifth Ward and surrounding areas. They followed up on every possible lead. They reached out to local media, hoping someone, somewhere, had seen their daughter, their sister, their aunt. But as summer turned to fall and fall turned to winter, hope began to fade. The flyers they had so carefully posted around the neighborhood started disappearing, weathered by Houston's humid climate and replaced by newer missing person posters. The family's fears grew more prevalent with each passing day. When asked by a reporter what her greatest fear was, Melissa Cashaw's response was both heartbreaking and prophetic. That someone has killed her. August 9th, 2024. 4 months after Dion was last seen, her family finally made the official report to Houston police. She was now officially listed as a missing person. The case was assigned to HPD's Missing Persons Unit, but with no leads, no witnesses, and no evidence of foul play, there was little they could do except add Dion's information to the national database. But what the family didn't know, what the police didn't know, what nobody could have possibly known, was that by the time they filed that missing person report, Dion Williams was likely already dead. The investigation stalled. Months passed. The family's anguish deepened. Melissa Cashaw would later appear on local news 8 months after her daughter's disappearance, still holding on to hope, but clearly preparing for the worst. "If you could talk to the person who did something to her or knows where she is, what would be your message for them?" a reporter asked her. Her response revealed the depth of a mother's love and forgiveness. "Please turn yourself in. Have mercy. We forgive you." December 2024. Nearly 8 months after Dion vanished, her case was featured in local media again. The headline read, "Family fears missing, loved one killed, 8 months after her disappearance from Fifth Ward." Most of the original flyers had disappeared, but the family's determination hadn't wavered. Houston police confirmed to reporters that this was still an active and open missing persons case. They provided contact numbers for anyone with information. But behind the official statements, everyone involved seemed to understand the grim reality. After 8 months with no contact, no sightings, no evidence that Dion was alive, this was likely no longer a missing person case. This was probably a homicide case waiting for a body to be found. And then, on a cold February morning in 2025, that's exactly what happened. At approximately 5 p.m., Houston police received what they initially classified as a suspicious package call. The caller was a man who regularly scoured the area looking for scrap metal to sell. This wasn't unusual. Many people in Houston make extra money collecting and selling metal, especially in industrial areas near the bayou. But what this scrap metal hunter found inside that yellow igloo cooler would change everything. When he opened it, expecting maybe some discarded tools or metal parts, he instead discovered what appeared to be human skeletal remains, specifically a human skull. The man immediately called 911. Within minutes, the area was swarming with Houston Police Department homicide detectives and investigators from the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences. They established a crime scene perimeter and began the careful process of documenting and collecting evidence. What struck investigators immediately was the deliberate nature of the disposal. This wasn't a random dumping. Someone had carefully placed human remains inside a cooler, sealed it, and transported it to this specific location. The question was why here, and why a cooler? For 5 months, from February to July, those remains sat in the morgue while forensic scientists worked to establish identity. They extracted DNA, examined dental records, and used every available method to determine who this person was and how they died. Meanwhile, Dion's family continued their agonizing wait. They had no idea that their daughter, sister, and aunt had already been found. They continued reaching out to media, continued hoping for any news, any sign that Dion might still be alive. If you're finding this case as compelling as I am, and you want to stay updated on true crime stories that matter, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. These are the stories that need to be told, the voices that need to be heard, and your support helps ensure we can continue bringing you in-depth coverage of cases like Dion's. July 11th, 2025. After 5 months of painstaking forensic work, the Harris County Forensic Science Center finally had their answer. The skeletal remains found in that yellow cooler belonged to 35-year-old Dion Williams. The notification process is one of the most difficult aspects of any homicide investigation. When police officers arrive at a family's door to deliver news like this, they're not just providing information. They're destroying hope, confirming worst fears, and beginning a new chapter of grief that will last forever. Melissa Cashaw had spent 15 months wondering what happened to her daughter, 15 months of hoping for a phone call, a text message, any sign that Dion was still alive. Instead, she received the news that every missing person family dreads. Her daughter hadn't just died. Someone had killed her and disposed of her remains like garbage. The investigation immediately shifted into high gear. HPD's Homicide Division took over the case completely, and they began the process of retracing Dion's final months. They interviewed family members, friends, acquaintances, and anyone who might have had contact with her in the weeks before she disappeared. What they discovered painted a picture of a woman who, despite her struggles, was trying to rebuild her life. Dion was working as a hair braider, a skill that allowed her to earn money while maintaining some flexibility in her chaotic lifestyle. She was trying to stay connected with her 2 young daughters. She was attending family gatherings when she could. The mention of meeting a rapper in the 5th Ward area became a crucial lead. Investigators began identifying and interviewing local musicians, particularly those involved in Houston's underground rap scene. The 5th Ward has a rich musical history, but it's also an area where the music industry intersects with street life in ways that can be dangerous. What makes Dion's case particularly challenging is the gap between when she was last seen and when her body was discovered. 10 months is a long time in a homicide investigation. Witnesses forget details. Evidence disappears. People move away or die. The longer the gap, the harder it becomes to establish exactly what happened and who was responsible. The Houston Police Department's approach to Diane's case reflects the reality of modern homicide investigations. They immediately began analyzing cell phone data, looking for patterns that might reveal who Diane was with in her final days. They examined social media accounts, not just Diane's, but those of people in her network, searching for any mention of plans to meet someone or go somewhere specific. The forensic evidence from the cooler itself became crucial. Fingerprints, DNA evidence, even the serial number of the cooler could potentially lead investigators to a purchase location and ultimately to the perpetrator. Modern forensic techniques can extract evidence from the smallest traces, and investigators were methodical in their collection and analysis. But what emerged from the investigation was a portrait of systemic failure. Diane Williams was a woman who fell through multiple cracks in society's safety net. She struggled with addiction, homelessness, and the challenges of maintaining relationships while dealing with personal demons. Yet she was also a mother, a daughter, a sister, and an aunt who was loved and missed. The delay in reporting her missing reflects a harsh reality about people living transient lifestyles. When someone like Diane disappears, it's often weeks or months before anyone realizes they're truly gone. Unlike people with stable jobs, regular schedules, and consistent living situations, those living on the margins can vanish without immediate notice. This delay has serious implications for investigations. The first 48 hours after someone goes missing are crucial for gathering evidence and establishing timelines. When that window extends to months, the chances of solving the case decrease dramatically. The ongoing investigation into Diane's death faces significant challenges. After more than a year since her disappearance, physical evidence has likely degraded or disappeared entirely. Witnesses may have died, moved away, or simply forgotten crucial details. The transient nature of Diane's lifestyle means that many people who knew her may themselves be difficult to locate. Yet investigators remain committed to finding answers. The Houston Police Department's Homicide Division continues to follow leads and interview potential witnesses. They've asked anyone with information about Diane's death or her whereabouts between April and August 2024 to contact them at 713-308-3600 or Crime Stoppers at 713-222-TIPS. For Diane's family, the identification brought both relief and renewed anguish. Relief because they finally had answers about what happened to their loved one. Anguish because those answers confirmed their worst fears. Diane hadn't simply walked away from her life. Someone had taken it from her. The impact on her two young daughters cannot be understated. These children spent over a year wondering where their mother was, holding on to hope that she might return. Now they must process not only the loss of their mother, but the violent circumstances of her death. If you've stayed with us through this entire investigation, you understand why cases like Diane's matter. These aren't just statistics or news stories. These are real people whose lives were cut short by violence, whose families deserve justice, and whose stories need to be told. Hit that like button if you believe these cases deserve our attention, and subscribe to ensure you don't miss our coverage of other cases that need to be solved. As of today, Diane Williams's case remains an active homicide investigation. No arrests have been made, no suspects have been publicly identified. The person or persons responsible for her death remain free, potentially posing a continued threat to other vulnerable individuals in the Houston area. The investigation continues, but it will require community involvement to reach a resolution. Someone in Houston knows what happened to Diane Williams. Someone saw her with the person who killed her. Someone knows why she was murdered and who disposed of her body in that yellow cooler near Buffalo Bayou. Diane Williams was 35 years old when her life was violently ended. She was a mother, daughter, sister, and aunt who, despite her struggles, was loved and missed by her family. She was a human being who deserved to live, who deserved better than to have her remains discovered by a stranger searching for scrap metal. If you have any information about Dionne Williams' disappearance or death, please contact the Houston Police Department immediately. Your call could be the one that finally brings justice for Dionne and peace for her family. This is a case that can still be solved, but it will require all of us working together to ensure that whoever killed Dionne Williams is held accountable for their actions. A dedicated nurse, beloved by her patients and colleagues, leaves her home at exactly 6:34 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in March 2024. She's heading to work, just like she has for the past 15 years. But 3.5 hours later, her phone goes dead in a Portland neighborhood she has no business being in. The next day, her car mysteriously reappears at her apartment complex, cleaned with industrial-grade products. Christina Ace never made it to work that day. She never made it home either. And what investigators discovered next would turn this missing person case into something far more disturbing. Today, we're diving deep into a case that has stumped the Vancouver Police Department, drawn FBI involvement, and left a community desperate for answers. This is the story of Christina Ace, a 62-year-old nursing director whose disappearance on March 26, 2024, has become one of the Pacific Northwest's most perplexing mysteries. But before we unravel this puzzle, let me tell you something that will chill you to the bone. The evidence suggests that whatever happened to Christina wasn't random. It wasn't spontaneous. Someone had been watching her movements for weeks. Someone knew exactly where she was going that morning, and someone made sure she would never come back. Christina's story begins not in the United States, but in Argentina, where she was born in 1962. She was a biochemist there, a woman of science who understood the complexities of life at a molecular level. But like so many immigrants, she dreamed of something more. In the mid-2000s, she made the life-changing decision to leave everything behind and start over in America. The transition wasn't easy. Despite her advanced education and scientific background, Christina's first job in the United States was as a cook in a nursing facility. But here's what makes her story so remarkable. She refused to let circumstances define her destiny. She taught herself English from scratch, enrolled in nursing school, and earned her BSN, RN, and eventually her Doctor of Medical Science degree. By 2009, Christina had landed a position at Rose Lynn Care Center in West Lynn, Oregon. She wasn't just any nurse. She was the nursing director, the person who coordinated care for dozens of elderly residents who depended on her expertise and compassion. Her colleagues didn't just respect her, they considered her family. Amy Schauer, one of Christina's co-workers, later told reporters something that perfectly captures who Christina was as a person. She was just a very kind person. She never had a bad word to say about anybody. She gave her whole life to helping others. For 15 years, Christina maintained the same routine. She lived in Vancouver, Washington, and made the daily commute to West Lynn, Oregon. Every morning, she would leave her apartment around 6:30 a.m. and arrive at work by 7:30 a.m. She was reliable, punctual, and completely dedicated to her patients. But in the weeks leading up to March 26, 2024, something changed. Something that, in hindsight, investigators now recognize as the beginning of the end. On February 27th, March 1st, and March 5th, Christina left her home at exactly 6:30 a.m., just like always. But approximately 20 minutes later, she would text her boss with the same message. She would be running late and wouldn't arrive until 8:30 a.m. instead of her usual 7:30 a.m. Now, you might think this sounds innocent enough. People run late for work all the time, but here's where it gets interesting. Vancouver police discovered that the Southeast Foster Road exit off Interstate 205 is exactly a 20-minute drive from Christina's apartment. And that exit leads directly to the Glenwood Park area of southeast Portland, where cell phone data would later show Christina's phone spending hours on the day she disappeared. The pattern was established. For 3 separate occasions, Christina was making unexplained trips to the same area of Portland, lying to her employer about why she was late, and somehow making it to work without anyone suspecting anything was wrong. What was she doing during those missing hours? Who was she meeting, and why did she feel the need to lie about it? These questions would become crucial on March 26, 2024. That Tuesday started like any other day. Christina left her Vancouver apartment at 6:34 a.m., her cell phone automatically connecting to nearby towers as she drove south on Interstate 205. But instead of continuing to West Lynn for work, she took that familiar exit at Southeast Foster Road. What happened next has been pieced together through cell phone data, security cameras, and witness statements. But the picture that emerges is deeply unsettling. At 6:47 a.m., just 13 minutes after leaving home, Christina's phone showed she had taken the Southeast Foster Road exit and was driving through residential neighborhoods in Southeast Portland. She wasn't lost. She wasn't making a quick stop. According to the data, she spent the next 3 hours moving between the Glenwood Park area and what investigators believe were one or more specific houses. Think about that for a moment. 3 hours. That's not a brief meeting or a quick errand. That's enough time for something significant to happen, something that required planning and coordination. During this time, Christina sent that familiar text to her boss at Roslyn Care Center, saying she would be late for work. Her colleagues weren't concerned. After all, she had done this several times in recent weeks. They had no reason to suspect that this time would be different. But at exactly 10 a.m., everything changed. Christina's phone moved to the intersection of Southeast Flavel Street and 92nd Avenue. For 5 minutes, it remained stationary at that exact location. Then, at 10:05 a.m., the phone went dark. Not just turned off, but completely dead to the world. That intersection would become ground zero for one of the most intensive missing person searches in recent Pacific Northwest history. But here's what makes this case so chilling. Christina Ace was never seen again. When she didn't show up for work, her colleagues at Roslyn Care Center immediately knew something was wrong. This wasn't like Christina. Even when she was running late, she always called. She always kept in touch. She would never simply disappear without explanation. Her husband reported her missing that same day. By evening, search teams were scouring the Glenwood Park area where her phone had last pinged. Volunteers with boats searched nearby waterways. Police officers knocked on doors throughout the neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen a Hispanic woman in her early 60s. But it was what happened the next day that transformed this from a missing person case into something much more ominous. On March 27th, exactly 24 hours after Christina Ace vanished, her 2013 Toyota RAV4 mysteriously reappeared in the parking lot of her Vancouver apartment complex. The same car she had driven into Portland the morning before. The same car that should have been wherever Christina was, but Christina was nowhere to be found. When Vancouver police examined the vehicle, they discovered something that sent chills down their spines. The interior surfaces had been cleaned with what appeared to be industrial-grade cleaning products, not the kind of casual wipe-down you might do after spilling coffee. This was thorough, methodical professional cleaning. Detective Jason Nicholson would later write in a search warrant affidavit, "There is probable cause to believe that Christina's sudden disappearance is related to a serious crime or imminently dangerous medical emergency." Let that sink in for a moment. A dedicated nurse who had never missed work without calling, who had no history of mental health issues, who spoke to her sisters in Argentina every single day, had vanished without a trace. Her car had been returned, cleaned, and abandoned, and law enforcement was now using words like serious crime. Sandy Hayden, a licensed practical nurse who worked alongside Christina, captured what everyone was thinking when she told reporters, "Hearing about the cleaning product in the car gives me a very bad suspicion something bad has happened, and I don't like thinking of that. It's devastating." But the mystery was just beginning. As investigators dug deeper into Christina's final weeks, a disturbing pattern emerged. Those 3 previous occasions when she had texted about being late for work weren't isolated incidents. They were practice runs. Someone had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. The precision was terrifying. Whoever orchestrated Christina's disappearance knew her schedule, knew her route to work, knew exactly how long it would take her to reach that southeast Foster Road exit. They knew she was the type of person who would text her boss if she was running late. They had studied her habits, her routines, her predictable nature, and they had used all of that information against her. The FBI's involvement in the case speaks volumes about how seriously federal authorities are taking this disappearance. The Bureau doesn't typically get involved in missing person cases unless there's evidence of kidnapping, human trafficking, or other federal crimes. Their participation suggests they believe Christina's disappearance crosses state lines or involves organized criminal activity. What makes this case even more haunting is how well-loved Christina was in her community. Her co-workers at Roseland Care Center didn't just miss her professional expertise, they mourned the loss of someone they considered family. Amy Schauer and her sister Nicole Oquist took charge of organizing search efforts and spreading awareness about Christina's case. They created a Facebook group called Christina ASE Missing that has become the central hub for information and updates. These weren't just colleagues trying to find a missing coworker. These were people desperately searching for someone they loved. The community response has been extraordinary. When Amy contacted Chad Banks at Lamar Advertising about purchasing a billboard to publicize Christina's disappearance, she was told it would cost $13,000 for a single billboard. But something remarkable happened. Chad Banks was so moved by Christina's story that he donated not one, but 7 billboards across the Portland metropolitan area, for free. 2 vigils have been held in Christina's honor. The first took place on April 5th, just 10 days after her disappearance. The second was held on April 26th, what should have been Christina's 62nd birthday. Instead of celebrating with cake and presents, her friends and colleagues stood with candles, hoping and praying for her safe return. But as weeks turned into months, hope began to give way to grim reality. If you've been following this case, and you're as captivated by these mysterious details as I am, then you understand why thousands of people are demanding answers. If this story has gotten your heart racing, and you want to stay updated on every development in cases like this, then hit that subscribe button right now. The investigation has revealed details that paint an increasingly dark picture of what may have happened to Christina. Crime Stoppers of Oregon is now offering a $2,500 reward for information leading to an arrest in the case. Not information leading to finding Christina. Information leading to an arrest. That distinction is crucial because it suggests law enforcement believes they're dealing with a criminal act, not a medical emergency or voluntary disappearance. One of the most significant developments came when investigators analyzed Christina's cell phone data in forensic detail. The movement patterns they discovered tell a story that's both fascinating and terrifying. Remember, Christina's phone showed her taking the southeast Foster Road exit at 6:47 a.m. and then spending 3 hours in the Glenwood Park area. But it wasn't random movement. The data suggests she was traveling between the park itself and what investigators believe were specific residential addresses. This wasn't someone who was lost or confused. This was someone who knew exactly where she was going and who she was meeting. But here's what makes investigators' blood run cold. Christina's co-workers have stated unequivocally that they cannot think of any reason she would have connections to that area of Portland. Amy Schauer put it bluntly. I think it's important to note that while Christina's phone or car may have been in that area, those are not places that I personally would see Christina ever going to. So who was Christina meeting? What was she doing for 3 hours? And why did someone feel the need to clean her car with industrial chemicals before returning it to her apartment complex? The answers to these questions may lie in the 5 key theories that investigators are pursuing. First, the timing. Christina didn't go directly to work on March 26th, breaking a routine she had maintained for 15 years. This suggests the detour was planned and purposeful. Second, the duration. Her phone remained in the Glenwood Park area for approximately 3 hours, indicating an extended interaction or event, not a brief meeting. Third, the pattern. In the weeks before her disappearance, Christina had misled her employer and husband about her whereabouts on at least 3 other occasions, suggesting someone was grooming her for what would happen on March 26th. Fourth, the car. The mysterious return of her cleaned vehicle indicates someone wanted to eliminate evidence while also sending a message. Fifth, the communication cutoff. Her phone's abrupt shutdown at a specific intersection suggests either a deliberate decision to go dark or an external force that ended her ability to communicate. Each of these elements points to the same chilling conclusion. Christina Ace didn't simply disappear. She was taken. Recent developments in the case have provided new hope for investigators. In late 2024, the FBI announced they were expanding their investigation to include potential connections to other missing person cases in the Pacific Northwest. This suggests they may have identified patterns linking Christina's disappearance to other crimes. Advanced forensic analysis of Christina's vehicle has also yielded new evidence that hasn't been made public. While investigators won't discuss specifics, they have indicated that DNA evidence recovered from the car may provide crucial leads in identifying those responsible for her disappearance. The international aspect of the case has also taken on new significance. Christina maintained regular contact with her sisters in Argentina, speaking with them daily via video calls. The fact that she had such strong family connections overseas means that her disappearance has drawn attention from international law enforcement agencies. One theory that investigators are pursuing involves Christina's background as a biochemist. Her scientific training and knowledge of medical procedures could have made her valuable to certain criminal organizations involved in drug manufacturing or human trafficking. This would explain the sophisticated planning involved in her disappearance and the professional cleanup of evidence. Another avenue of investigation focuses on her work at the care center. Nursing directors have access to controlled substances and medical equipment that could be valuable to criminal organizations. They also interact with vulnerable elderly patients who might be targets for financial fraud. But perhaps the most disturbing theory involves personal connections from Christina's past. The fact that she was being manipulated for weeks before her disappearance suggests that someone she knew and trusted was involved in orchestrating her fate. If you're watching this and you lived in the Southeast Portland area in early 2024, if you remember seeing a Hispanic woman in her early 60s who seemed out of place or distressed, if you noticed unusual activity around Glenwood Park during that time period, your information could be the key to solving this case. The latest development came in early 2025 when the FBI announced they were offering federal resources to support the ongoing investigation. This includes advanced forensic capabilities, behavioral analysis experts, and access to national databases that could help identify suspects or connect Christina's case to other crimes. Special Agent Rebecca Torres, who is coordinating the federal involvement, stated, "We believe that Christina Ace's disappearance was not an isolated incident. We're looking at this as part of a potentially larger pattern of criminal activity that may span multiple jurisdictions." This statement has sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community and raised new questions about whether Christina was the victim of an organized criminal enterprise that may have targeted other victims. The technological aspects of the investigation have also advanced significantly. Cell phone data analysis has become more sophisticated, allowing investigators to create detailed movement patterns not just for Christina's phone, but for other devices that were in the same area around the same time. Facial recognition technology is being used to analyze security camera footage from dozens of locations along Christina's route and in the areas where she spent those mysterious 3 hours. This technology has the potential to identify individuals who may have been involved in her disappearance. But perhaps the most important development has been the growing public awareness of the case. True crime podcasts have featured Christina's story, reaching audiences across the country. Social media campaigns have kept her photograph and information circulating widely. For those of you who have followed this entire journey with us today, who understand the complexity and heartbreak of Christina's case, I want you to do something important. Share this story. Talk about it with your friends, your family, your coworkers, because somewhere out there, someone knows something. As we reach the first anniversary of Christina's disappearance, her case remains one of the most actively investigated missing person cases in the Pacific Northwest. The Vancouver Police Department, Portland Police Bureau, West Lynn Police Department, and FBI continue to follow leads, analyze evidence, and pursue every possible avenue of investigation. Her co-workers at Rose Lynn Care Center continue their advocacy efforts, maintaining the Facebook group, organizing remembrance events, and keeping Christina's story in the public eye. They've created a scholarship fund in her name to help other immigrants pursue nursing education, ensuring that her legacy of helping others continues even in her absence. The residents at Rose Lynn Care Center still ask about Christina. Some of them, struggling with memory issues, don't understand why their favorite nurse hasn't been to see them lately. The staff finds these conversations heartbreaking, but they also serve as daily reminders of how many lives Christina touched and how deeply she is missed. If Christina Ace is out there somewhere, if she's being held against her will, if there's any chance she can be rescued, then continued public attention to her case may be her lifeline. If she has been killed, then justice for Christina depends on someone coming forward with information that can lead to arrests and prosecutions. The case of Christina Ace remains open, active, and solvable. Somewhere out there are the answers her family needs, the justice she deserves, and the truth that will finally explain what happened during those 3 hours in southeast Portland on March 26, 2024. Until that day comes, we remember Christina Ace not as a victim, but as a dedicated nurse, a loving sister, a trusted colleague, and a woman who gave her life to helping others. We remember her smile, her kindness, her determination to build a better life in a new country. And we refuse to let her story end with questions, because Christina Ace deserves answers. Her family deserves closure, and her community deserves justice. If you have any information about Christina's disappearance, please contact the Vancouver Police Department, the FBI, or Crime Stoppers of Oregon. Your call could be the one that finally brings Christina home. A young woman steps out of a downtown bar at 2:30 a.m. on a Sunday morning in July 2025. The air is warm, the streets of La Crosse, Wisconsin are quiet, except for the distant sound of the Mississippi River flowing just blocks away. She's 22 years old, a graduate student with her whole life ahead of her. She's been out with friends, laughing, enjoying what should have been just another weekend night. The walk to her apartment is simple, familiar, less than a mile, a journey she's made countless times before. But this time, something goes wrong. By 3:22 a.m., security cameras capture her final moments, walking southbound on Front Street South, just 1 block from the Mississippi River. By morning, when her family tries to reach her, there's only silence. No response to calls, no response to texts, nothing. What happened during those 53 minutes between leaving the bar and her last known location would spark a massive search effort, engage an entire community, and ultimately end in tragedy along the banks of the Mississippi River, more than a dozen miles from where she was last seen alive. This is the story of Elliot Hines, a story that begins with a typical night out and ends with questions that still haunt a community today. My name is Narrator, and today we're examining what really happened during those crucial 53 minutes, the extensive search that followed, and the heartbreaking discovery that brought closure to one family, while raising new questions about safety in college towns across America. Eliota Hines wasn't just another missing person statistic. She was a graduate student at Viterbo University in La Crosse, Wisconsin, pursuing her degree in mental health counseling. At 22, she had already shown the kind of compassion and dedication that suggested she would make a real difference in people's lives. She was originally from Hortonville, Wisconsin, a small community where everyone knew everyone. Her mother, Amber Hines, described her as someone with a huge heart who was deeply loved by her family. standing 5 feet 4 inches tall, weighing just 106 pounds. With blonde hair and blue eyes, Elliot had the kind of presence that people remembered. On the night of July 19, 2025, Elliot made plans to go out with friends in downtown La Crosse. It was a typical weekend for a graduate student. She had been working hard on her studies, and like many young people her age, she deserved a night to unwind and enjoy herself. The group ended up at Bronco's Bar, a popular spot in La Crosse's downtown area. The bar was busy that Saturday night, filled with other young people enjoying their weekend. Security footage from inside the establishment would later show Elliot laughing and talking with her friends, completely unaware that this would be one of the last times she would be seen alive by people who knew her. At 2:30 a.m. on Sunday, July 20th, Bronco's Bar closed for the night. This is where the timeline becomes crucial. Elliot left the bar with her friends, but at some point during the next hour she became separated from the group. What we know from the police investigation is that Elliot was walking alone by 3:22 a.m. The distance from Bronco's Bar to where she was last captured on surveillance camera was just 0.4 miles. Under normal circumstances, this walk should have taken about 8 minutes. But somehow, it took Elliot nearly an hour to cover this short distance. Was she taking her time? Did she stop somewhere? Did she encounter someone? These are questions that investigators would later grapple with as they tried to piece together her final movements. The surveillance footage from 3:22 a.m. shows Elliot walking southbound on the 500 block of Front Street South. She's wearing a white t-shirt and jean shorts, the same clothes she had on when she left the bar. She appears to be alone, walking with purpose toward what should have been her apartment less than a mile away. But Eliota Hines never made it home that night. When Sunday morning came, her family expected to hear from her. It was routine. Elliot was the kind of daughter who stayed in touch, who let her parents know she was safe. When the phone calls went unanswered and the text messages received no response, Amber Hines knew something was terribly wrong. If you've ever had that gut-wrenching feeling that something isn't right with someone you love, you understand exactly what Elliot's mother experienced that Sunday morning. The fear, the growing panic, the desperate hope that there's a simple explanation. Hit that notification bell right now, because cases like this remind us how quickly everything can change, and you won't want to miss how this story unfolds. The Hines family didn't waste time. They immediately began trying to locate Elliot, calling her friends, checking with people who had been out that night, trying to retrace her steps. When these efforts yielded no results, they contacted the La Crosse Police Department. By Sunday evening, Eliota Hines was officially reported missing. The La Crosse Police Department immediately launched an investigation. This wasn't just another missing person case where they could afford to wait 24 or 48 hours. A young woman had vanished in the early morning hours near the Mississippi River, in an area where the police were all too familiar with similar tragedies. The investigation revealed something that would become central to understanding this case. The area where Elliot disappeared had a troubling history. Between 1997 and 2006, multiple young people, mostly college students, had been found dead in the Mississippi River after nights out drinking in downtown La Crosse. These deaths had previously sparked conspiracy theories, including something called the smiley face murder theory. This theory suggested that the drownings of multiple young men in Midwestern states were actually murders, marked by smiley face graffiti found near discovery locations. However, the FBI had investigated and discounted this theory, instead attributing the deaths to alcohol consumption combined with the dangerous proximity to the Mississippi River. But for Elliot's family, statistics and theories meant nothing. Their daughter was missing, and every hour that passed made the situation more desperate. By Monday morning, July 21st, the search effort had expanded dramatically. The La Crosse community, Viterbo University, and people from Elliota's hometown of Hortonville all mobilized to help find her. At 8 a.m. that Monday, volunteers gathered at 1425 8th Street South in La Crosse. The scene was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. Dozens of people, Many who had never met Elliot personally showed up ready to distribute flyers and search the surrounding area. The search wasn't just happening on foot. The La Crosse Police Department had deployed multiple resources, including air, land, and water search teams. Helicopters flew over the Mississippi River and surrounding areas. Boats patrolled the waterways. Search dogs were brought in to try to pick up any scent trail from Elliot's last known location. As Monday turned into Tuesday, the search intensified. Prayer services were organized. Social media campaigns spread Elliot's photo and information across multiple states. News outlets began covering the story, drawing attention from far beyond Wisconsin. Tuesday night came and went with no breakthrough. The search teams had covered miles of terrain along the Mississippi River. They had interviewed dozens of people who had been in downtown La Crosse that Saturday night. They had analyzed hours of surveillance footage, but Elliot remained missing. By Wednesday morning, July 23rd, the search had been ongoing for nearly 4 full days. The community's hope was beginning to mix with a growing sense of dread. Volunteers continued to show up, but the conversations were becoming more subdued, more worried. Then at approximately 10:30 a.m. local time on Wednesday, July 23rd, everything changed. A fisherman was on the Mississippi River near Brownsville, Minnesota, more than a dozen miles south of where Elliot had last been seen. He was focused on his fishing when he noticed something floating in the water that he initially thought was a log. As he got closer, the horrifying reality became clear. It wasn't a log. It was a body. The fisherman was, understandably, spooked by the discovery. He immediately contacted authorities, who responded quickly to secure the scene. The owner of a nearby marina bar later described how the fisherman had found the body face down, wrapped in duckweed from the river. Within hours, the body was recovered from the Mississippi River. The preliminary identification confirmed what Elliot's family and the entire La Crosse community had been dreading to hear. The body was that of 22-year-old Elliot Hines. The moment when hope turns to heartbreak is something that changes everyone involved forever. If this story is affecting you the way it's affecting me, and you want to see more deep dives into cases that matter, smash that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what other cases you think deserve this level of attention. Your engagement helps ensure stories like Elliot's continue to be told with the respect they deserve. The news of Elliot's death sent shockwaves through the community. La Crosse Police Chief Sean Coudron released a statement saying, "This was not the outcome we had hoped for throughout this search. Our thoughts are with Elliot's family, friends, and all those who knew Elliot. For Elliot's family, the discovery brought a mixture of devastating grief and the painful closure that comes with finally knowing what happened to their daughter." In a statement released after her body was found, they wrote, "Elliot is a beautiful person. She was smart, funny, caring, and loved fiercely by us. We don't know why we were so blessed to have her as a daughter, or why we are unable to keep her. But finding Elliot's body was only the beginning of answering the questions surrounding her death." The location where she was discovered raised immediate concerns for investigators. How had she ended up more than a dozen miles downstream from where she was last seen alive? What had happened during those final hours? Multiple law enforcement agencies were now involved in the investigation. The La Crosse Police Department was joined by the La Crosse County Sheriff's Office, Houston County Sheriff's Office, Jackson County Sheriff's Office, Vernon County Sheriff's Office, La Crescent Police Department, and the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. An autopsy was immediately ordered to determine the cause and manner of Elliot's death. This would be crucial not only for providing closure to her family, but also for determining whether any criminal activity had been involved in her disappearance and death. On Friday, July 25th, just 2 days after Elliot's body was discovered, the La Crosse Police Department released a statement that would fundamentally change how people understood this tragedy. Based on the preliminary autopsy results, authorities announced that they did not believe there was any criminal conduct related to Elliot's death. The evidence suggested that no foul play had been involved in her disappearance and subsequent death. This finding was both a relief and a source of additional grief for those who had been following the case. Relief, because it meant that there wasn't a predator lurking in downtown La Crosse, targeting young women. Additional grief because it confirmed that this tragedy was likely preventable, the result of circumstances rather than malicious intent. The troubling history of similar incidents in La Crosse couldn't be ignored. Between 1997 and 2006, multiple young people had died after ending up in the Mississippi River following nights out in the downtown area. The victims included UW La Crosse students Jeffrey F. Giese, who was 20 years old when his body was found on May 22, 1999, with a blood alcohol content of 0.42, and Jared Dion, who was 21 when his body was found on April 15, 2004, with a blood alcohol content of 0.27. These previous cases had led to the formation of an organization called River Watch, which worked to understand and prevent similar tragedies. Their analysis of the deaths between 1997 and 2006 determined that they were the result of excessive drinking combined with the dangerous proximity to Riverside Park, which borders the Mississippi River. For Elliott's case, the preliminary autopsy findings suggested that her death fit this tragic pattern rather than representing something more nefarious. While this didn't make the loss any less devastating for her family and friends, it did provide some context for understanding how such a tragedy could occur. Cases like Elliott's remind us how precious and fragile life really is. Every person behind these stories had hopes, dreams, and people who loved them. If Elliott's story has moved you, honor her memory by sharing this video and helping ensure that her story continues to raise awareness about safety in our communities. Hit that like button and subscribe, because stories like this need to be told with the dignity and respect they deserve. The community response to Elliotta's death extended far beyond the immediate search efforts. People established fundraising accounts to help her parents, Shane and Amber Hines, with expenses during this difficult time. As the investigation continued, law enforcement remained committed to providing complete answers to the Hines family. While the preliminary autopsy results had ruled out foul play, investigators continued their work to establish a complete timeline of events. The case also sparked renewed conversations about safety measures in college towns, particularly in areas where entertainment districts are located near dangerous waterways. Some communities have implemented additional lighting, increased police patrols, or installed barriers near water to prevent accidental drownings. For the Hines family, no amount of community support or investigative thoroughness could bring Elliott back. In their final public statement, they captured the devastating reality of their loss. We cannot thank our family, friends, the La Crosse community, Viterbo University, or the La Crosse PD enough for showing up for Elliott. As of the most recent updates, the La Crosse Police Department continues to finalize their investigation, with complete autopsy results still pending. The case serves as a reminder of the importance of safety awareness, community vigilance, and the unpredictable nature of tragedies that can strike even in seemingly safe environments. Elliott Hines was just 22 years old when her life ended. She was studying to become a mental health counselor, preparing for a career dedicated to helping others. Her family described her as smart, funny, caring, and deeply loved. Her death represents not just the loss of a young life, but the loss of all the good she would have done in the world. The story of Elliott Hines began with a typical night out with friends and ended in tragedy along the banks of the Mississippi River. While we may never know every detail of what happened during those crucial hours, we do know that a family lost their daughter, a community lost a promising young member, and the world lost someone who had so much more to give. In remembering Elliott, we honor not just her life, but the importance of community, the value of thorough investigation, and the need for continued vigilance in protecting young people in our communities. Her story serves as both a tragedy and a call to action for all of us to look out for one another and to never take for granted the precious nature of every single day we have. A 26-year-old genius, the architect behind one of the most revolutionary technologies of our time, a man who helped create ChatGPT, the AI that changed everything. And then, Just weeks after he decided to expose his former employer's darkest secrets, he's found dead in his San Francisco apartment with a single gunshot wound to the head. The official story? Suicide. Case closed. Move along. But what if I told you that this man had written in his personal journal that he was a credible threat because of his cooperation with the New York Times? What if I told you that his own mother found blood spatter patterns that didn't match the official narrative? What if I told you that this case was quietly reopened in January 2025, then officially closed again in February, only to spark protests outside OpenAI's headquarters just days ago? Welcome to the story of Suchir Balaji. A story that Silicon Valley's most powerful companies hoped would disappear. A story that raises questions about what happens when brilliant minds threaten billion-dollar empires. A story that might just expose the deadly cost of speaking truth to power in the age of artificial intelligence. This is not just another tech tragedy. This is an investigation into a death that could reshape everything we think we know about AI, corporate power, and the price of being a whistleblower in 2024. November 21st, 1998. Suchir Balaji is born in Florida to Indian-American parents who would eventually move to the heart of Silicon Valley. But Suchir wasn't destined for an ordinary life in tech. By age 11, he was already coding with educational tools like Scratch. By 13, this kid had built his own computer from scratch. At Monte Vista High School in Cupertino, Suchir became a finalist for the United States of America Computing Olympiad. This is the Olympics of computer programming for high school students, the kind of achievement that gets you noticed by the biggest names in tech. John Schulman, co-founder of OpenAI, recruited Suchir straight out of UC Berkeley in 2019. One of the most prestigious AI research labs in the world wanted this kid so badly they grabbed him before he even had a chance to consider other options. For nearly 4 years, Suchir was living the Silicon Valley dream. He was earning over $350,000 annually and contributing to projects that would eventually change the world. He wasn't just another engineer. He was one of the key architects behind GPT-4, the language model that powers ChatGPT. John Schulman would later write that Suchir's contributions were essential and that their projects wouldn't have succeeded without him. This was acknowledgement that Suchir Balaji was instrumental in creating the technology that would make OpenAI one of the most valuable companies on Earth. But here's where the story takes its first dark turn. Suchir was working on something called WebGPT, a precursor to ChatGPT. Part of his job involved gathering and organizing massive datasets from across the internet. And as Suchir dove deeper into this work, he began to notice something troubling. The data they were using included copyrighted material, lots of it. Articles from major newspapers, excerpts from published books, content from websites that explicitly prohibited automated scraping. OpenAI was essentially photocopying the entire internet and using it to train their AI models without asking permission or paying licensing fees. When you train an AI model, you're making complete copies of copyrighted material and storing them in the model's neural networks. From a legal standpoint, this could be considered massive copyright infringement on a scale never seen before. By early 2024, Suchir was expressing concerns internally about OpenAI's data practices. Then came OpenAI's transition from a nonprofit research organization to a for-profit company valued at over $150 billion. According to his mother, Suchir was not okay with this transformation. In August 2024, Suchir Balaji made a decision that would change everything. He resigned from OpenAI. His explanation was simple but loaded with implications. If you believe what I believe, you have to just leave the company. But Suchir didn't just leave quietly. In October 2024, he published a detailed essay outlining his concerns about generative AI and copyright law. The essay was technical, methodical, and devastating. His key argument was this: while AI models rarely produce outputs that directly copy their training inputs, the process of training itself involves unauthorized copying of copyrighted works. And under U.S. copyright law, Unauthorized copying is infringement, regardless of how the copies are eventually used. But publishing an essay wasn't enough for Suchir. On October 23, 2024, he contacted the New York Times and agreed to an interview. This wasn't a casual conversation. This was the New York Times, and they were already suing OpenAI for copyright infringement. In that interview, Suchir went public with his accusations. He told the Times that OpenAI was illegally using copyrighted articles to train its AI systems. He provided insider details about how the company's data collection process worked. The interview sent shockwaves through Silicon Valley. Here was someone who had helped build ChatGPT, telling the world that the technology was based on stolen intellectual property. According to his mother, Purnima Ramarao, Suchir had written in his personal journal about being a credible threat because of New York Times. He knew that his revelations could damage OpenAI's reputation and expose the company to massive legal liability. The timing of what happened next is what makes this case so compelling and so suspicious. On November 18, 2024, just 8 days before Suchir's death, the New York Times filed a court document in their lawsuit against OpenAI. In that filing, they specifically named Suchir Balaji as someone who possessed unique and relevant documents that would support their case against the AI giant. Suchir wasn't just a critic anymore. He was a key witness in what could become one of the most important copyright cases in the digital age, a case that could potentially cost OpenAI billions of dollars. November 22, 2024, Suchir has his final conversation with his father, Balaji Ramamurthy. It's the day after his 26th birthday. According to his father, Suchir seems fine. He had just returned from a trip to Los Angeles with friends and was in good spirits. November 26, 2024. Suchir stops responding to his mother's text messages. Concerned, Purnima Ramarao asks San Francisco police to conduct a wellness check at her son's Lower Haight apartment. If you're questioning everything you thought you knew about this case, smash that subscribe button because this story is about to take a turn that will leave you speechless. When police entered Suchir's apartment, they found him dead from a single gunshot wound to the head. The gun was registered to Suchir, purchased in January 2024. The apartment was locked from the inside with a deadbolt. Within hours, investigators were treating this as a suicide. But Suchir's parents immediately knew something was wrong. First, there was no suicide note. Suchir was methodical, detailed, someone who documented everything. If he had planned to take his own life, his parents believe he would have left some explanation. Second, the timeline didn't make sense. Suchir had been making plans for the future. He was working on personal projects, planning a non-profit organization. According to his mother, he was scheduled for additional interviews about his OpenAI revelations. Third, and most disturbing to his family, were the physical evidence inconsistencies they observed at the scene. Purnima Ramarao hired independent forensic experts to examine the case. According to her claims, the blood spatter patterns didn't match what you would expect from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. She found what she described as bloodshots in the bathroom and signs of struggle that weren't adequately explained by the official investigation. The family also questioned the toxicology results. The autopsy revealed that Suchir had alcohol, amphetamine, and GHB in his system at the time of death. But according to his mother, he was not a drinker. And there's no receipt of alcohol in the apartment. There's no empty bottle. GHB is particularly concerning because it's known as a date rape drug that can be used to incapacitate victims. Perhaps most troubling was what the family claims the police didn't investigate. According to Purnima Ramarao, the San Francisco Police Department failed to check all 3 entrances to Suchir's building. They didn't examine key fob records that could show who had accessed the building. They didn't review all available security camera footage. The family's attorney, Kevin Rooney, pointed out another suspicious detail. The police ruled the death a suicide within 40 minutes of examining the body. For a case involving a high-profile whistleblower who had just been named as a key witness in a major lawsuit, this seemed remarkably fast. But the story doesn't end with the initial investigation. In January 2025, something unexpected happened. The San Francisco Police Department quietly changed the status of Suchir's case from closed suicide to open and active investigation. No explanation was given for this change, but it suggested that new evidence or pressure had emerged. This development gave hope to Suchir's parents and supporters. Elon Musk, who has his own ongoing disputes with OpenAI, began commenting on the case on social media. When Purnima Ramarao posted that her son's death was murder, Musk replied, "This doesn't seem like a suicide." Tucker Carlson featured the case on his show, giving Suchir's mother a platform to share her concerns with a national audience. Silicon Valley Congressman Ro Khanna called for a full and transparent investigation into the circumstances of Suchir's death. Before we reveal what the family discovered that changed everything, hit that like button if you believe whistleblowers deserve justice. The renewed attention led to protests outside OpenAI's headquarters in February 2025. Approximately 35 demonstrators gathered to demand a federal investigation into Suchir's death and to protest what they saw as the suppression of AI whistleblowers. But then, just as quickly as it had been reopened, the case was closed again. On February 14, 2025, the San Francisco Police Department and the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner released a joint report definitively ruling Suchir's death a suicide. The report stated that forensic analysis found the death was caused by a single bullet wound, front to back with a downward trajectory, and that there were no other injuries or bruises on his body. The investigation found Suchir's DNA on the firearm and detected gunshot residue particles on his hands. Computer searches revealed he had been looking up information about brain anatomy. The apartment showed no signs of forced entry, and investigators concluded Suchir was alone at the time of his death. The official conclusion: the SFPD found no evidence or information to establish that Mr. Balaji died of means other than a suicide by self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. But Suchir's parents refused to accept this conclusion. They've filed a lawsuit against the San Francisco Police Department, demanding access to all investigative materials, including body camera footage from the officers who responded to the scene. Their attorney argues that the investigation was incomplete and that crucial evidence was ignored or misinterpreted. The family continues to rent Suchir's apartment, hoping that federal authorities will eventually take over the case. The broader implications of this case extend far beyond one tragic death. Suchir's revelations about OpenAI's data practices have contributed to ongoing legal challenges that could reshape the entire AI industry. Multiple lawsuits are still pending against OpenAI and other AI companies for copyright infringement. The case has also highlighted the vulnerability of AI whistleblowers. Unlike other industries, there are currently no specific federal protections for employees who expose wrongdoing at AI companies. This gap in protection becomes especially concerning when you consider the enormous financial stakes involved in the AI industry. Some experts believe that Suchir's death, regardless of its cause, may have a chilling effect on other potential whistleblowers. If brilliant engineers see what happened to someone who spoke out against powerful AI companies, will they be willing to risk their careers and potentially their safety to expose wrongdoing? The timing of recent developments adds another layer to this story. With the appointment of Kash Patel as FBI director, Suchir's supporters are hoping for federal intervention. Patel has promised to restore transparency and accountability to federal law enforcement, and the family believes their case deserves federal attention. The question remains, what really happened to Suchir Balaji? Was this a tragic suicide by a young man, overwhelmed by the pressure of taking on one of the world's most powerful companies? Or was this something more sinister, the silencing of a whistleblower who knew too much about practices that could cost billions of dollars? The official investigation says suicide. The family says murder. The truth may be somewhere in between, or it may be exactly what one side claims. What we do know is this: Suchir Balaji was a brilliant young man who had the courage to speak truth to power. He exposed practices at OpenAI that raised serious questions about how AI companies operate. He was willing to sacrifice his lucrative career to stand up for what he believed was right. And now he's dead. Whether his death was self-inflicted or not, it serves as a stark reminder of the personal costs of whistleblowing in an industry where the stakes have never been higher. The fight over AI regulation, copyright law, and corporate accountability will continue long after this case is resolved. But for Purnima Ramarao and Balaji Ramamurthy, this isn't about industry regulation or corporate policies. This is about their son. This is about getting answers to questions that may never be fully resolved. As this case continues to evolve, one thing is certain. The death of Suchir Balaji has exposed the dark underbelly of Silicon Valley's most powerful industry. It's shown us what happens when brilliant minds challenge billion-dollar empires. And it's reminded us that in the age of artificial intelligence, the most human stories are often the most tragic. If this investigation opened your eyes to the dark side of Silicon Valley, subscribe and ring that notification bell because we're bringing you more stories the powerful don't want you to hear. The fight for truth doesn't end here, and neither do we. You're found dead in a Siberian forest, lying flat on your back under a pine tree. Your boots are unlaced, no socks on your feet, sleeves pushed up to your elbows. Your eyes and mouth are wide open, staring at nothing. The official story? You wandered out into the freezing night and died of hypothermia. But here's what doesn't make sense. You're an experienced hiker who loves cold weather. You were excited about a mountain climb just hours away. And most disturbing of all, an independent forensic examination would later conclude you didn't die where you were found, and you certainly didn't die of hypothermia. This is the story of Colin Madsen, a 25-year-old American student whose mysterious death in the mountains of Siberia has haunted his family for nearly a decade. What started as a simple hiking trip turned into an international controversy involving alleged cover-ups, contradictory forensic evidence, and a mother's relentless fight for justice. Colin Robert Lloyd Madsen wasn't your typical American abroad. Born and raised in Missouri, he had fallen in love with Russia and its culture during his studies. By 2016, he was fluent in Russian and studying at the Irkutsk branch of Moscow State Linguistic University. But Colin was more than just a student. He was an environmental activist who volunteered with local Greenpeace chapters and helped build hiking trails around the pristine shores of Lake Baikal. Those who knew Colin described him as someone with an incredible tolerance for cold weather. He was the kind of person who would venture out into the Siberian wilderness regularly, always prepared, always cautious. His friends often joked about how he could handle freezing temperatures that would send others running for shelter. In March 2016, Colin planned what should have been a routine hiking trip to the Sayan Mountains near Arshan, a small tourist village about 200 kilometers southwest of Irkutsk. He was traveling with 3 friends, 2 Russians and 1 American, all excited about climbing a peak locals called Love Peak. The group arrived in Arshan on March 26, 2016, staying at a local guest house. Everything seemed normal. They spent the evening planning their hike, checking their equipment, and discussing the route they would take the next morning. Colin was particularly excited about the climb, talking animatedly about the views they would see from the summit. But sometime before dawn on March 27th, everything changed. Colin's friends woke up to find him gone. No note, no explanation, no goodbye. His hiking gear was still there, his warm clothes untouched. According to witness statements, Colin had simply walked out of the cabin in the early morning hours, wearing only a thermal shirt, without telling anyone where he was going. The immediate assumption was that he had gone to use the outdoor toilet facilities, but when he didn't return, his friends began to worry. This wasn't like Colin. He was responsible, always letting people know his plans, especially when it came to outdoor activities where safety was paramount. Local authorities were contacted, and a search operation began almost immediately. Russian police, rescue teams, and volunteers combed the surrounding forest and mountains. Colin's mother, Donna Madsen Calcutt, who is a doctor, flew from Missouri to Russia as soon as she heard about her son's disappearance, joining the desperate search efforts. For 8 agonizing days, teams searched the rugged terrain around Arshan. The weather was challenging, with temperatures dropping below freezing at night. Search helicopters flew overhead, while ground teams with tracking dogs explored every possible path Colin might have taken. Dana Calcutt later described the search operation as frustrating and poorly coordinated. She claimed that local police seemed more interested in asking questions about Colin's character and activities than actually finding him. Some officers even made what she considered defamatory remarks about her son, suggesting he might have been involved in drug use or other questionable behavior. On April 4, 2016, the search came to a tragic end. Colin's body was discovered by a search party approximately 1 mile from the guest house where he had been staying. He was found lying on his back under a large pine tree, positioned in a way that immediately raised questions among those who saw the scene. The location where Colin was found was particularly puzzling. It was less than 2 miles from where he had been staying, in an area that had supposedly been searched multiple times during the week-long operation. How had dozens of searchers missed a body in such a relatively accessible location? Even more disturbing were the circumstances in which Colin was found. According to witness accounts and crime scene photographs, he was lying flat on his back on grass and wilted vegetation, not huddled or curled up as hypothermia victims typically are. His boots were unlaced, he wasn't wearing socks, and his sleeves were pushed up to his elbows. His eyes and mouth were open, and his left arm was extended with both hands clenched into fists. Russian investigators immediately opened a murder investigation, which is standard procedure in missing person cases. However, their preliminary findings seemed to contradict what many expected. They found no obvious signs of external trauma, Colin's clothing appeared intact, and he was still carrying his wallet with cash and his American passport, ruling out robbery as a motive. But as details of the investigation began to emerge, Colin's family and friends noticed troubling inconsistencies in the official narrative. First, there was the question of clothing. Initial reports suggested Colin had left the guest house wearing only a t-shirt, which would explain why he succumbed to hypothermia. However, crime scene photographs clearly showed him wearing a long-sleeved thermal shirt, exactly the kind of clothing someone familiar with cold weather would choose for even a brief outdoor excursion. If you're finding this case as fascinating and disturbing as I am, make sure you're subscribed, because we're just getting started. The evidence we're about to explore will challenge everything you think you know about this case, and trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. Second, there was Colin's footwear situation. He was found wearing unlaced boots with no socks. Anyone who knew Colin found this detail particularly unbelievable. He had recently injured his ankle and would never have attempted to walk any significant distance in unlaced boots, especially without socks. The terrain around Arshan is rough and unforgiving, making such footwear not just uncomfortable, but dangerous. Third, there was Colin's mental state the night before his disappearance. All witnesses confirmed that he had been excited and enthusiastic about the planned hike. He had been looking forward to climbing Love Peak for weeks and had spent the evening before carefully preparing his equipment. It made no sense that someone so enthusiastic about a morning hike would suddenly decide to wander off into the forest in the middle of the night. Russian toxicology reports added another layer of complexity to the case. While tests on Colin's hair, blood, and nails came back negative for controlled substances, his urine showed the presence of cannabis metabolites at a concentration of 16.6 nanograms per milliliter. However, this finding raised more questions than it answered. The presence of cannabis metabolites doesn't indicate recent use, as these compounds can remain detectable in urine for weeks after consumption. More importantly, none of Colin's friends tested positive for any substances when they were screened 3 days after his body was found. If the group had been using drugs together on the night of March 26th, as Russian authorities suggested, why would only Colin test positive? Colin's mother, Dana Calcutt, was skeptical of the drug allegations from the beginning. She knew her son well and believed that if he had used marijuana, it would have been hours before his disappearance, not immediately before. She also pointed out that Colin was not the type to use drugs and then wander off into a dangerous forest alone. The Russian investigation moved quickly to a conclusion. By July 30th, 2016, just 4 months after Colin's death, authorities officially closed the case, ruling that he had died of hypothermia while under the influence of drugs. No evidence of foul play was found, according to their final report. But Dana Calcutt wasn't satisfied with these findings. As a medical professional herself, she understood the signs and symptoms of hypothermia death, and nothing about her son's case fit the typical pattern. Hypothermia victims usually remove their clothing as their condition worsens, a phenomenon known as paradoxical undressing. Colin's clothing was not only still on his body, but appeared to be properly arranged. Determined to find the truth, Dana and her husband, University of Missouri professor Mick Calcutt, decided to commission their own independent forensic examination. They reached out to Independent Forensic Services, a Colorado-based company that had worked on several high-profile criminal cases in the United States. The American forensic team was given access to the Russian autopsy reports, toxicology results, and crime scene photographs. What they found challenged every aspect of the Russian investigation's conclusions. The Independent Forensic Services report, completed in June 2017, concluded that Colin Madsen did not die of hypothermia. Instead, the evidence suggested he had died from mechanical asphyxiation, possibly suffocation. The report identified several key findings that contradicted the hypothermia theory. First, the forensic pathologists noted that Colin showed none of the typical signs of hypothermia death. His body position was inconsistent with someone who had frozen to death, as hypothermia victims typically curl into a fetal position to conserve body heat. Colin was found lying flat on his back with his limbs extended. Second, the American examination identified multiple injuries on Colin's body that had not been adequately explained by the Russian investigation. These included blunt force injuries to his head and extremities, including 2 abrasions surrounded by bruising on his scalp that the report stated cannot be caused by a fall. The pathologists concluded these injuries were most likely caused by external force applied to Colin's head. The report also noted suspicious injuries to Colin's left ear, including sharp abrasions that couldn't be explained by post-mortem changes to the skin. There were signs of bruising behind his left ear and unusual discoloration of his lips and nostrils, which the forensic team identified as consistent with external mechanical asphyxiation. Perhaps most significantly, the American forensic examination challenged the timeline of Colin's death. Based on the state of decomposition and the absence of expected insect activity and predator damage, the pathologists estimated that Colin's body had been in the forest for somewhere between 2 hours and 1 day maximum, not the 8 days that had elapsed between his disappearance and the discovery of his body. This finding raised explosive questions about the official timeline. If Colin hadn't been dead for 8 days, where had he been? What had happened to him during those missing days? And why had his body appeared in a location that had supposedly been searched multiple times? The forensic report also noted other suspicious elements that suggested Colin's body might have been moved to the location where it was found. The absence of expected post-mortem changes, the positioning of the body, and the relatively good condition of his remains all pointed to the possibility that he had died elsewhere and been transported to the discovery site. Armed with this new evidence, Dana Calcutt began a campaign to have her son's case reopened. She contacted U.S. Embassy officials, wrote letters to government representatives, and launched a petition calling for American authorities to pressure Russia into conducting a new investigation. The family's efforts gained international attention when Radio Free Europe published a detailed investigation into Colin's case in July 2017. The article highlighted the contradictions between the Russian and American forensic findings and raised questions about whether Russian authorities had conducted a thorough investigation. But the family's fight for justice faced significant obstacles. U.S. Embassy officials told Dana that they could not officially acknowledge homicide as the cause of death unless Russian authorities changed their determination. This created a bureaucratic catch-22. The American government couldn't act without Russian cooperation, but Russian authorities showed no interest in reopening a case they considered closed. The case took on additional complexity when questions were raised about Collins' activism in Russia. During his time in Siberia, he had been involved with environmental groups and had participated in protests organized by local Greenpeace activists. Months before his death, he had received a warning letter from local authorities about his participation in these protests. Some observers wondered whether Collins' environmental activism had made him a target. Russia has a complicated relationship with environmental organizations, particularly those with international connections. Foreign activists and their local partners often face harassment, intimidation, and worse. However, there was no direct evidence linking Collins' activism to his death. His involvement with environmental groups appeared to be relatively minor, focused mainly on trail building and peaceful protests. It seemed unlikely that such activities would have led to murder, but the possibility couldn't be entirely dismissed. This is where the case gets even more intriguing, and if you're as invested in finding out the truth as Collins' family has been for nearly a decade, hit that like button, because what I'm about to tell you will change how you see this entire investigation. In 2020, 4 years after Collins' death, lawyers representing Dana Calcutt filed a formal petition with Russian authorities to reopen the investigation. The petition included the findings from the American forensic examination and requested that Russian investigators reconsider their conclusions based on this new evidence. The petition also demanded the return of evidence that Russian authorities had withheld from the family, including CCTV footage from Arshan, additional autopsy photographs, and tissue samples that could be subjected to further testing. The family argued that this evidence was crucial to understanding what had really happened to Colin. Russian authorities have not responded positively to these requests. The case remains officially closed, with the cause of death listed as hypothermia. No additional investigation has been conducted, and no new evidence has been made available to the family or independent researchers. The lack of cooperation from Russian authorities has fueled speculation about a potential cover-up. Some observers have suggested that local officials may have been involved in Collins' death, or may be protecting those who were responsible. Others believe that the initial investigation was simply incompetent, and that officials are now reluctant to admit their mistakes. Dana Calcutt has not given up her fight for justice. She continues to advocate for her son's case, working with lawyers and activists to keep pressure on both Russian and American authorities. She has spent her family's savings on legal fees, forensic examinations, and travel costs related to the investigation. The emotional toll on the family has been enormous. Dana has described the past decade as a nightmare of bureaucratic obstacles, false promises, and crushing disappointment. She has watched other families receive justice for loved ones who died abroad, while her son's case remains in limbo. The Colin Madsen case highlights the challenges faced by families seeking justice when their loved ones die under suspicious circumstances in foreign countries. International law enforcement cooperation can be complicated by political tensions, jurisdictional issues, and differing legal systems. In Collins' case, these challenges have been compounded by the deteriorating relationship between the United States and Russia. Since 2016, relations between the two countries have reached their lowest point since the Cold War, making cooperation on criminal cases increasingly difficult. The case also raises questions about the safety of American students and activists abroad. Collins' death occurred during a period of increasing restrictions on foreign NGOs and civil society organizations in Russia. While there's no evidence that his activism directly led to his death, the case serves as a reminder of the potential risks faced by Americans engaged in political or environmental activities overseas. Recent developments in the case have been limited. The COVID-19 pandemic and ongoing tensions between the US and Russia have made it even more difficult for the family to pursue their investigation. However, Dana Calcutt continues to hope that new evidence will emerge or that political changes will create opportunities for progress. One potential avenue for advancement is the growing international attention to cases of suspicious deaths and human rights violations in Russia. As more cases come to light and international pressure increases, there may be opportunities to revisit cold cases like Colin's. The advancement of forensic technology also offers hope. New testing methods and analytical techniques might be able to extract additional information from existing evidence, potentially providing new insights into what happened to Colin during his final hours. For now, Colin Madson's case remains a tragic mystery that has consumed his family's lives for nearly a decade. The young man who loved Russia and its people enough to learn the language, study the culture, and dedicate himself to environmental conservation died under circumstances that may never be fully explained. The case serves as a reminder that justice is not always achievable, even when families have resources, determination, and compelling evidence. Sometimes the pursuit of truth runs up against walls of bureaucracy, politics, and indifference that seem impossible to overcome. But Dana Calcutt's fight continues, driven by a mother's love and an unshakable belief that her son deserves justice. As she has said repeatedly, she's not fighting against Russia or its people, but for the truth about what happened to Colin in those final hours in the Siberian forest. The Colin Madsen case reminds us that behind every unsolved mystery, there are real people suffering real pain. For Colin's family, the question isn't just what happened to their son, but whether justice is possible when the truth is inconvenient for those in power. If this case has moved you the way it has moved me, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell. Cases like Colin's need to be told, remembered, and investigated until the truth finally comes to light. Because somewhere out there, someone knows what really happened to Colin Madsen in the early hours of March 27, 2016. And until that truth comes forward, his family will continue to fight, and his story will continue to demand answers that may never come. December 2024, a young woman sits at a dinner table with her family in Naples, Florida. She's 22 years old, full of life, ready for adventure. Her boyfriend has just promised to show her the world. 3 weeks, he says. Just 3 weeks and they'll be back. That dinner would be the last time her family would see Kylie Bernstein for 7 months. But this isn't your typical missing person case, because Kylie wasn't kidnapped. She wasn't taken against her will. She left willingly with someone she trusted, someone who had already shown violent tendencies toward women before, someone whose past was about to catch up with him in the most terrifying way possible. What started as a romantic getaway quickly transformed into a psychological nightmare that would leave investigators scrambling, a family desperate for answers, and a community questioning everything they thought they knew about love, control, and the thin line between protection and imprisonment. The Collier County Sheriff's Office had seen missing person cases before, but nothing quite like this. Nothing where the victim seemed to be communicating regularly, posting on social media, sending texts, making phone calls. Yet something was fundamentally wrong, something that would take months to uncover and even longer to understand. Kylie Bernstein was living what appeared to be a dream life, traveling across the Midwest with the man she loved, exploring new cities, experiencing new cultures, living freely without the constraints of routine or responsibility. Her social media painted the picture of a young woman living her best life. But social media, as we all know, rarely tells the complete story. Behind every perfectly curated post, behind every smiling selfie, behind every enthusiastic text message to family, there was something else happening. Something that her mother would later describe as deeply unsettling. Something that would make her daughter's voice sound different during phone calls. Something that would leave subtle marks that were almost impossible to detect in photographs. William Canterbury wasn't just Kylie's boyfriend. He was her ticket to freedom, her promise of adventure, her gateway to seeing the world beyond the familiar streets of Naples, Florida. But Canterbury carried baggage that Kylie's family knew nothing about. Dark secrets from his past that painted a picture of a man capable of violence, manipulation, and control. In 2018, Canterbury had been arrested for domestic violence in Lee County. The charges were never pursued by the state attorney's office, a detail that would later haunt everyone involved in Kylie's case. How many red flags had been ignored? How many warning signs had been dismissed? How many times had the system failed to protect vulnerable women from men with histories of violence? The 3-week trip stretched into January, then February, then March. Kylie's family grew concerned, but she was still communicating, still sending updates, still posting on social media, still assuring everyone that she was living her dream. The extended timeline seemed romantic rather than concerning. Young love knows no boundaries, right? Adventure doesn't follow schedules. But by spring, something had shifted in Kylie's communications. Her mother noticed it first. The tone of her voice during phone calls had changed. She sounded different, strained, sometimes upset. The carefree young woman who had left Naples full of excitement was gradually being replaced by someone who seemed increasingly isolated from her support system. The family's concerns deepened when they examined photographs Kylie had sent in May. What appeared to be bruising around her nose and eye area was visible, though it was difficult to confirm definitively. Was it shadows from poor lighting? Was it makeup that hadn't been applied properly? Or was it evidence of something far more troubling? These weren't the kind of injuries that happen accidentally during romantic getaways. These weren't the kind of marks that appear from hiking adventures or exploring new cities. These were the kind of injuries that suggested violence. That suggested control. That suggested a relationship that had transformed from romantic adventure into something far darker. If you're finding this case as disturbing as we are, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell. Cases like these remind us why it's so important to stay informed about the warning signs of domestic violence and to support the brave investigators who work tirelessly to protect vulnerable individuals. July 7, 2025, marked a turning point in the case. During a phone call for a sibling's birthday celebration, Kylie sounded visibly upset. Her family could hear it in her voice. The strain, the fear, the desperation of someone who was trying to communicate without being able to speak freely. It was the kind of conversation that leaves family members lying awake at night, replaying every word, analyzing every pause, wondering what their loved one was really trying to tell them. After that phone call, silence. Complete radio silence. No more texts, no more social media posts, no more phone calls, no more updates about their romantic adventure across America. The communication that had been Kylie's lifeline to her family suddenly stopped, leaving them with nothing but questions and growing panic. July 21st, 2025. Kylie's mother could no longer ignore her instincts. Something was terribly wrong. She contacted the Collier County Sheriff's Office and officially reported her daughter missing. The investigation that followed would reveal the true nature of Canterbury's character and the extent to which he had isolated Kylie from her support system. Private investigators hired by the family began digging into Canterbury's background. What they discovered was a pattern of behavior that extended far beyond the 2018 domestic violence arrest. This was a man who had demonstrated repeatedly that he was capable of controlling, manipulating, and harming the women in his life. The case gained media attention quickly. Missing person cases involving young women always capture public interest. But this case had elements that made it particularly compelling. The extended timeline, the gradual shift in communication, the boyfriend with a violent history, the family's growing desperation as months passed without resolution. Law enforcement agencies across multiple states became involved as investigators traced Canterbury and Kylie's movements throughout the Midwest. Credit card transactions, hotel registrations, social media check-ins, and witness statements began painting a picture of their journey. But more importantly, They began revealing the control dynamics that had transformed a romantic getaway into a psychological prison. The investigation revealed that Canterbury had systematically isolated Kylie from her support system. The decision to leave her car and belongings behind wasn't romantic spontaneity. It was a calculated move to ensure she had no means of independent transportation or communication beyond what he allowed. The extended timeline wasn't about exploration and adventure. It was about removing her from familiar environments where she might seek help or support. Canterbury's promise to show Kayleigh the world had become a mechanism for controlling every aspect of her life. Where they went, how long they stayed, who they interacted with, how often she could communicate with family. Everything was filtered through his decisions and his comfort level, with maintaining the illusion of a romantic relationship while exercising complete control. The turning point came when law enforcement agencies coordinated their efforts and began closing in on Canterbury's location. The details of how exactly Kayleigh was found haven't been fully released, but what we know is that on July 22, 2025, the Collier County Sheriff's Office confirmed that she had been located alive and well. But what does alive and well really mean in a case like this? Physical safety is obviously the primary concern, but the psychological impact of 7 months of isolation, control, and potential abuse cannot be understated. The young woman who left Naples in December 2024 was not the same person who was found in July 2025. The case raises uncomfortable questions about how domestic violence evolves in our modern world. Canterbury didn't need to physically restrain Kylie to control her. He used her love, her trust, her desire for adventure, and her isolation from support systems to maintain power over her life. It's a form of abuse that's harder to detect, harder to prosecute, and harder for victims to escape. This case also highlights the importance of trusting our instincts when something feels wrong about a loved one's situation. Kylie's mother's persistence in reporting her missing, despite the fact that her daughter appeared to be communicating regularly, ultimately saved her life. Sometimes the most dangerous situations are the ones that appear normal on the surface. The Kylie Bernstein case serves as a stark reminder that domestic violence doesn't always look like what we expect. It doesn't always involve obvious physical injuries or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it looks like a romantic adventure that gradually becomes a prison. Sometimes it looks like a loving boyfriend who slowly isolates his partner from everyone who cares about her. As we wrap up this case, remember that there are people in your life who might be experiencing similar situations right now. If something feels wrong about a friend or family member's relationship, trust that instinct. If someone you care about seems different during phone calls or visits, pay attention to those changes. And if you're in a relationship that's making you feel isolated, controlled, or afraid, know that there are resources available to help you. If this case has impacted you, or if you know someone who might be in a similar situation, please take a moment to like this video and share it with others. Awareness is our strongest weapon against domestic violence. And cases like Kayleigh's remind us why we must never stop fighting to protect vulnerable individuals in our communities. A father walks into his daughter's kitchen expecting a warm Sunday evening visit. Instead, he's met with billowing smoke, the acrid smell of burning flesh, and a scene that will haunt him for the rest of his life. His 21-year-old daughter lies motionless on the floor, stabbed multiple times, set on fire. And just meters away, an 18-month-old baby girl sits in stunned silence, witnessing what no child should ever see. This isn't the beginning of a horror movie. This is the real-life nightmare that shattered the Hales family on November 21, 1993. And 31 years later, the question that has tormented investigators, destroyed relationships, and divided an entire community remains unanswered. Who killed Karen Hales? But here's what makes this case extraordinary. Just 3 months ago, in October 2024, Suffolk police made a revelation that changed everything. The 3 main suspects they'd been investigating for over 3 decades, they're all dead, every single one of them. And now, for the first time in 31 years, People who've been living in fear might finally be ready to speak. Karen Hales was 21 years old when her life was brutally cut short. She lived on Lavenham Road in Ipswich with her partner Peter Ruffles and their beautiful 18-month-old daughter Emily. Karen worked part-time at the local boot store while Peter worked at the bus depot. They were young, in love, and building a life together. Sunday, November 21st, 1993 started like any other weekend day for the small family. The weather that day tells its own story. There were at least 2 inches of snow blanketing the ground. It wasn't exceptionally cold, but the combination of snow and early darkness meant the streets were virtually empty. By 4 p.m., darkness had already fallen over Ipswich, the kind of darkness that gives predators confidence and witnesses very little to see. Karen and Peter had spent the day visiting family and watching television. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would suggest this ordinary Sunday would become the day that changed everything. At 3 p.m., Peter began getting ready for his afternoon shift at the bus depot. Karen, being the loving partner she was, made him sandwiches for work. At exactly 3:50 p.m., Karen and little Emily stood at the window, waving goodbye as Peter left for what would be their final farewell. Peter arrived at work just 10 minutes later, right on schedule. But here's where the story takes its first crucial turn. Soon after Peter arrived at work, Karen's parents, Geraldine and Graham Hales, came to see him. They were having problems with their car and needed to talk to Peter about it. During that conversation, Peter mentioned that Karen was home alone with Emily. That simple statement would set in motion the events that would lead to the discovery of one of Suffolk's most horrific crimes. When Peter told them Karen was alone, Geraldine and Graham decided to visit their daughter and granddaughter on their way home. It was a spontaneous decision, a loving gesture from caring parents who wanted to check on their young daughter. They had no idea they were about to walk into a nightmare that would traumatize them for the rest of their lives. At approximately 4:40 p.m., Geraldine and Graham Hales knocked on Karen's front door. No answer. They knocked again. Still nothing. Graham, being a concerned father, tried the door handle. It was unlocked. The moment he opened that door, he knew something was terribly wrong. Smoke immediately hit them. Thick, choking smoke that burned their eyes and filled their lungs. Graham rushed toward the kitchen, following the source of the smoke. What he found there would haunt him forever. His daughter Karen was lying motionless on the floor. Multiple stab wounds covered her body. Someone had attempted to set her on fire. The flames were still burning when he found her. But here's the detail that makes this case even more chilling. 18-month-old Emily was in that same room. She was sitting on the kitchen floor, completely unharmed, but witnessing the aftermath of her mother's murder. The baby, who should have been Karen's greatest protection, had instead become the silent witness to her brutal death. Graham and Geraldine immediately called the police and fire department while scooping up little Emily to get her away from the horrific scene. When first responders arrived, they quickly determined that Karen had been the victim of a vicious attack. The fire was not accidental. Someone had deliberately tried to destroy evidence by setting Karen's body ablaze. If you're feeling the same chills I am right now, and you want to see how this investigation unfolds with all its shocking twists and the recent breakthrough that has everyone talking, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, what comes next will completely change how you see this case. The post-mortem examination revealed the full extent of Karen's injuries. The cause of death was determined to be shock and hemorrhage, secondary to multiple stab wounds. But the killer hadn't stopped there. The attempt to burn Karen's body suggested someone who either wanted to destroy evidence or send a message, or both. Suffolk police immediately launched what would become one of the biggest murder investigations in the county's history. A dedicated team of around 50 officers was assembled. They interviewed witnesses, conducted fingertip searches, forensically examined Karen's home and the surrounding area, carried out house-to-house inquiries, and questioned over 400 motorists, hoping someone had seen something suspicious. But here's what made this case particularly puzzling from the very beginning. There was no sign of forced entry at Karen's home. Either the front door had been left unlocked, or Karen knew her killer and had willingly let them into her house. This detail would become crucial to the investigation because it suggested that Karen's murderer was either someone she trusted or someone who had been watching the house, waiting for the perfect opportunity. The investigation into Karen's murder revealed something deeply unsettling. 2 Laser 7 brand kitchen knives were missing from the house. These weren't random items taken by a burglar. These were the weapons used to end Karen's life. Along with the knives, Karen's purse had also disappeared. To this day, 31 years later, none of these items have ever been recovered. The timeline of that day becomes crucial here. Remember, Peter left for work at 3:50 p.m. Karen's parents discovered her body at 4:40 p.m. That's a window of just 50 minutes. 50 minutes for someone to gain entry to the house, brutally murder Karen, attempt to set her body on fire, and escape without leaving a trace in the snow. But here's where the case gets even more chilling. The day before Karen's murder, on Saturday the 20th of November, something had already spooked her. Peter had gone out for the evening with colleagues from work, leaving Karen home alone. At some point during that evening, Karen heard someone at the front door. When she got up to look, she saw someone trying the door handle. Fortunately, the door was locked. Karen was too frightened to call out and see who it was. There had been reports of break-ins in the local area, and she didn't want to draw attention to the fact that she was alone in the house. This incident suggests that Karen's killer may have been watching the house, learning the family's routines, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Think about this for a moment. On Saturday night, someone tried Karen's door when Peter was out. On Sunday, when Peter left for work again, Karen was murdered. This wasn't a random attack. This was planned, calculated. Someone had been studying the Hales family, learning their patterns, waiting for the right opportunity. The investigation revealed several witness sightings that painted a disturbing picture of the events that afternoon. 2 local residents were taking a shortcut near Karen and Peter's house when they saw a man walking in the opposite direction. They were going to ask him for the time, but decided against it because he looked like he was in a hurry. They described him as wearing a blue or grey parka coat with a fur hood. But the most chilling sighting came from a woman walking her dog at approximately 4:40 p.m. She noticed a man running, and when he saw her, he stopped and stared. She later told police that the way he looked at her was deeply unsettling. Her description matched the other witness accounts. A man in a parka coat with fur trim, but this time he was running away from the direction of Karen's house at the exact time her parents were discovering her body. Years passed. Decades passed. The case went through regular reviews, and there were periodic media appeals, but Karen's killer remained unidentified. The investigation had generated over 1,400 lines of inquiry. Every single one was followed up. Over 400 motorists were questioned. Hundreds of witness statements were taken. Forensic evidence was analyzed and reanalyzed. But the killer remained a ghost. But here's what makes this case extraordinary, and why we're talking about it today. In October 2024, just 3 months ago, Suffolk police made a revelation that has changed everything about this 31-year-old cold case. Before I reveal this game-changing development that has investigators more hopeful than they've been in decades, I need you to do something. If this case is gripping you the way it's gripping me, smash that like button and share this video with someone who loves true crime. What I'm about to tell you next is the reason this case is making headlines again after 31 years of silence. The revelation came during a renewed appeal on BBC's Crime Watch Live. For the first time in 31 years of investigation, police revealed that they had 3 declared suspects for Karen's murder. But here's the shocking part. All 3 suspects are now dead, every single one of them. Andy Guy, the Major Crime Review and Unsolved Case Team Manager, explained the significance of this revelation. These 3 individuals were violent, involved in drugs and domestic burglaries. If anybody knew or suspected they had involvement in Karen's murder, they may have been too frightened to come forward. The fear of retaliation from these dangerous individuals had potentially kept witnesses silent for over 3 decades. But now, with all 3 suspects dead, that barrier has been removed. Police are hoping that people who were previously too scared to speak out or who felt some kind of loyalty to these individuals will now feel safe to come forward without fear of repercussions. The identity of these 3 deceased suspects remains a closely guarded secret. Police cannot name them publicly, but Andy Guy made it clear that there will be people in the community who know exactly who he's referring to. These weren't random criminals. They were local individuals whose violent reputations were well known in certain circles. Think about what this means. For 31 years, people in Ipswich may have been walking around knowing who killed Karen Hales. They may have suspected, they may have heard rumors, they may have even witnessed something. But fear kept them silent. Fear of these 3 violent men who were still alive, still potentially dangerous, still capable of retaliation. The police strategy is brilliant in its simplicity. By revealing that these suspects are dead, they've essentially given anyone with information a free pass to come forward. There's no longer any risk of retribution, no fear of becoming the next victim. The barriers that have protected Karen's killer for over 3 decades have finally been removed. But perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of this case is Karen's daughter, Emily. She was just 18 months old when her mother was murdered. She has no memories of Karen, no recollection of the woman who brought her into this world and loved her unconditionally. Emily has had to grow up with the knowledge that her mother was brutally murdered and that her killer has never been brought to justice. Emily is now 32 years old. She's lived more years without her mother than Karen ever got to live herself. Think about that for a moment. Karen was 21 when she died. Emily is now 32. Emily has surpassed the age her mother ever reached, and she's done it all without the guidance, love, and support that only a mother can provide. The current investigation is more hopeful than it's been in years. The revelation about the 3 deceased suspects has already generated new leads. People are coming forward with information they've held onto for decades. Conversations that were whispered in private are now being shared with investigators. The wall of silence that has protected Karen's killer for over 3 decades is finally beginning to crack. Here's what I need you to understand. This isn't just a story about a crime that happened 31 years ago. This is about justice that's still within reach. If you're watching this video and you're from the Ipswich area, if you remember anything from November 1993, if you've heard rumors or whispers over the years, now is the time to speak up. The people you were afraid of are gone. The only thing standing between Karen's family and justice is silence. And if you're not from the area but you believe in justice, share this video. Get Karen's story out there. Someone watching this might know something. Someone might remember a conversation, a strange behavior, a person who changed after that November day in 1993. The Joint Norfolk and Suffolk Unsolved Case Team can be contacted at 01953423819 or by email at unsolvedcasereviewsnorfolk.pnn, police.uk. You can also contact Crime Stoppers completely anonymously at 08005555111. Karen Hales was 21 years old when her life was brutally ended. She had dreams, plans, a future she was building with Peter and little Emily. All of that was stolen from her on a snowy Sunday afternoon by someone who thought they could get away with murder. For 31 years, they've been right. Emily Hales has lived 31 years without knowing who killed her mother. Karen's parents have endured 31 years of wondering who destroyed their family. The community of Ipswich has lived 31 years with the knowledge that a killer walked free among them. But this could be the year that changes everything. This could be the year that someone finally finds the courage to speak up. This could be the year that Karen Hales finally gets the justice she deserves. If you've made it this far, you clearly care about justice as much as I do. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, ring that notification bell, and share this video. Let's make sure Karen's story reaches as many people as possible, because somewhere out there, someone knows something. And now finally, they can speak without fear. The kitchen fire that was meant to destroy evidence 31 years ago has instead become a beacon, still burning bright, still calling for justice. The question is, will you help fan those flames until the truth finally emerges? Karen Hales, remember her name, share her story, help bring her killer to justice. A man dies in police custody. His body bears the unmistakable marks of torture, but here's the twist that will make your blood run cold. He wasn't even the suspect. He was just the brother of someone accused of killing a 2-year-old girl whose body has never been found. This is the story of Danka Ilic, a case that would shake an entire nation and expose the dark underbelly of Serbian law enforcement. March 26, 2024, Banjsko Polje, a quiet village near Bor, Serbia. 23-month-old Danka Ilic is enjoying a simple afternoon walk with her mother, Ivana. The sun is shining, and like any typical day, a mother and daughter are spending precious time together. But at exactly 1:45 p.m., everything changes. In a matter of seconds, Ivana loses sight of her daughter. Just like that, Danka vanishes. What happens next makes this case unlike anything Serbia has ever seen. For the first time in the country's history, the Find Me system is activated. This emergency alert platform, designed specifically for missing children, sends notifications across the entire nation. Television screens flash with Danka's photograph. Radio stations interrupt their programming. The entire country stops what they're doing to search for one little girl. But here's where the story takes its first dark turn. As search teams scour the countryside and volunteers knock on every door, something strange happens. A video surfaces from Vienna, Austria. The footage shows a small girl who bears a striking resemblance to Danka, accompanied by 2 unknown women at a tram station. The family watches this video and makes a statement that sends chills down everyone's spine. They believe with high probability that the child in the video is their missing Danka. Austrian police immediately launch their own investigation. An Interpol yellow notice is issued. The case has now crossed international borders, and suddenly, what started as a local disappearance has captured the attention of multiple countries. For 10 agonizing days, Serbia holds its breath. Every news bulletin brings hope, then disappointment. Every phone call could be the breakthrough everyone is praying for. Then comes April 4th, 2024. Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić appears at a government session with news that no one wants to hear. Danka Ilic is dead. 2 men have been arrested for her murder. The entire nation that had been united in hope suddenly finds itself united in grief and outrage. The suspects are Dejan Dragicevic and Srđan Jankovic, both 50 years old and both employees of the local water company, Vodovod. According to authorities, these 2 men have confessed to a crime so heinous that it defies comprehension. The official story goes like this. Danka ran from her family's yard into the street. The 2 men driving their company vehicle struck her with their car. But instead of stopping to help, instead of calling for medical assistance, they made a decision that would haunt an entire country. They put the injured child in their trunk and drove to a nearby landfill. Here's what makes this confession even more disturbing. According to the initial statements, Danka was still alive when they put her in that trunk. The men claim they then killed her and disposed of her body for 10 days while an entire nation searched desperately for this little girl, while volunteers worked around the clock, while families checked every corner of their properties. Danka's body was allegedly somewhere in a landfill. But this is where the case begins to unravel in ways that no one could have predicted. Both men initially provide detailed confessions to police. They describe exactly how the crime occurred. They even lead investigators to various locations where they claim the events took place. Law enforcement officials are confident they have solved the case. The Minister of Interior at the time, Bratislav Gašić, publicly states that the suspects have confessed and described the crime in detail. Then something extraordinary happens. When the suspects appear before prosecutors for their formal hearings, their stories begin to change. Jankovic, who had initially confessed, suddenly refuses to speak. He invokes his right to remain silent. Dragicevic continues to maintain his confession, but cracks are starting to show in what seemed like a solid case. If you're finding this case as compelling as I am, and you want to stay updated on true crime stories that challenge everything we think we know about justice, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Because what happens next in Danka's case will shock you even more than what you've heard so far. As the investigation continues, both suspects request to be questioned again. This time, both men completely recant their confessions. They now claim they were indeed in the area that day, driving their company vehicle along the same street where Danka disappeared. But they insist they never saw the child, let alone harmed her. The case that seemed solved suddenly becomes a mystery again. Meanwhile, investigators are working frantically to find physical evidence that will support the confessions. They examine the company vehicle that the suspects were driving. They collect hundreds of DNA samples. They use GPS technology to track the vehicle's movements on the day Danka disappeared. But what they find, or rather what they don't find, changes everything. The DNA results come back, and they reveal something that contradicts the entire prosecution theory. There are indeed DNA traces found in the vehicle, but none of them belong to Danka Ilic. Think about that for a moment. Two men confess to putting a bleeding, injured child in their car trunk, yet forensic science finds no trace of her presence in that vehicle. But the investigation takes an even darker turn when authorities arrest additional suspects. Radoslav Dragicevic, the 73-year-old father of suspect Dejan Dragicevic, is taken into custody. Also arrested is Dejan's 40-year-old brother, whose name is also Dejan Dragicevic. They are suspected of helping to move Danka's body from the original location to somewhere else, which would explain why extensive searches of the landfill have yielded nothing. This is where the case transforms from a tragic child murder into something that exposes the dark heart of institutional corruption. On April 7, 2024, just 3 days after his arrest, the 40-year-old Dejan Dragicevic dies in police custody at the Bor Police Department. The official explanation from the Ministry of Internal Affairs is clinical and brief. They claim he became ill, that police officers and doctors from the local health center attempted resuscitation, but that he died of natural causes. Case closed, move along, nothing to see here. But autopsy results tell a very different story. The Institute of Forensic Medicine in Belgrade conducts a thorough examination and reaches a conclusion that sends shockwaves through the country. This was not a natural death. Dejan Dragicevic died a violent death. The evidence suggests he was beaten so severely that he succumbed to his injuries. Let that sink in. A man dies from injuries sustained while in police custody, and authorities initially claim it was natural causes. This revelation transforms the Danka Ilic case from a child murder investigation into a scandal that reaches the highest levels of Serbian law enforcement. The Department of Internal Control launches its own investigation into this death. On May 1, 2024, they issue their findings and recommendations. 3 police officers face disciplinary measures and suspension. But for many observers, this feels like too little, too late. A man is dead, and the circumstances surrounding his death raise serious questions about police conduct in this case. As months pass, the case against the original suspects becomes increasingly problematic. Legal experts begin to express serious doubts about the prosecution's ability to secure convictions without Danka's body and without reliable physical evidence. Lawyer Marko Pantic publicly states that the case is on glass legs and warns that without more substantial evidence, the prosecution may struggle to prove their case in court. The case continues to generate controversy throughout 2024. In September, the Higher Public Prosecutor's Office in Zaječar files formal charges against Dragicevic and Jankovic, requesting life imprisonment for both men. They also charge the elder Radoslav Dragicevic with lesser crimes related to concealing evidence and failing to report the murder. But even this step forward faces obstacles. In December 2024, the Chamber of the Appellate Court in Niš revokes the decision confirming the indictment and sends it back to the lower court. The legal proceedings have become a complicated back and forth between different levels of the judicial system. As we move into 2025, the case takes yet another turn. In April, the appellate court orders that the investigation be supplemented with additional evidence. They specifically request a reconstruction of the events under the same meteorological conditions and at the same time of day as the original incident. They also order that Danka's mother be re-examined as a witness. This reconstruction finally takes place in June 2025, more than 14 months after Danka's disappearance. Investigators return to Bansko Polje to recreate the events of that fateful day, hoping that new details will emerge that might finally provide the breakthrough this case desperately needs. But here's what makes this case truly extraordinary and why it continues to captivate public attention. We're not just dealing with a child murder case, we're looking at a complete breakdown of institutional trust. The changing confessions, the lack of physical evidence, the death in police custody, the complicated legal proceedings. All of these elements combine to create a case that raises fundamental questions about justice and accountability. The impact extends far beyond the courtroom. The director of Vodovod in Bor, the company where the suspects worked, resigned for moral reasons. This rarely happens in Serbian corporate culture, but the magnitude of this case demanded unprecedented responses. The case has also highlighted the importance of the Find Me system, which was activated for the first time during Danka's disappearance. This emergency alert platform proved its value in mobilizing public support and international cooperation, even though it ultimately couldn't prevent the tragic outcome. As we approach the 2-year anniversary of Danka's disappearance, her case remains one of the most controversial and heartbreaking in recent Serbian history. The legal proceedings continue, with courts still grappling with the fundamental question of how to prosecute a murder case, when the victim's body has never been found and the physical evidence contradicts the alleged confessions. For Danka's family, the lack of closure adds an additional layer of torment to their grief. Without her body, they cannot properly lay her to rest. Without definitive answers, they cannot find peace. And without justice, they cannot move forward. The case has also sparked broader conversations about police accountability, the reliability of confessions, and the importance of physical evidence in criminal prosecutions. Legal experts continue to debate whether this case can result in convictions and what precedent it might set for future cases with similar challenges. If this case has moved you as much as it has moved me, and if you believe that stories like Danka's deserve to be told with the respect and attention they merit, please take a moment to like this video and share it with others. Because the more people who know about cases like this, the more pressure there is on institutions to provide real answers and real justice. The truth about what happened to Danka Ilic on that March afternoon in 2024 may never be fully known. But her story serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of protecting our most vulnerable citizens and holding those in positions of authority accountable for their actions. As this case continues to work its way through the Serbian legal system, one thing remains certain. Danka Ilic's disappearance has exposed cracks in the foundation of institutional trust that will take years to repair. Her legacy may ultimately be not just the pursuit of justice for her own case, but the broader reforms that her story has inspired in Serbian law enforcement and judicial procedures. The search for truth in the Danka Ilic case continues, and until that truth is found, her story will remain a haunting reminder of a system that failed when it mattered most.